Yeah, okay.
Masithandaze. Almighty God, for you have called us to govern this province. We ask your help to make decisions and laws that will be just and will promote the interests of the people. Almachtige God, ons bid dat u gedrende ons vergaderings, ons dienende wijsheid zal gee en ons motiewe suiwer sal hou. En dat u ons sal help om ons tekortkomenge te oorkom en al ons besluite aan u op te dra. Sikelela Nkosi ilizwe lethu nabantu balo. Umisele uxolo Nkosi nokulunga kwiphondo lethu. Nkosi sikelela iAfrika. Gcina abantwana bayo. Khokela Nkosi inkokheli zayo. Inike uxolo Nkosi iAfrika. All this we beg in your most holy name. Amen. You may all be seated. Welcome and good afternoon, honorable members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This is the ordinary sitting of this House, and we gather here in terms of the order paper as presented to all the political parties and the honorable members. I would like to indicate to the honorable members that we do not have a declared load shedding. I therefore expect the honorable members to connect to this sitting, and I do hope that we are all able to do so. In the event of any difficulty, I have instructed the ICT unit to assist the honorable members to ensure that you are able to connect without difficulty. I would also extend my appreciation to the members of the Fourth Estate, the media, for your participation and the interest in our session, and of course in the business of this House. The media is not in any way participating by activating the camera. You only do so by listening. I know that you've been doing well, and you may also not activate your microphone. So thank you very much for having obeyed this rule. And of course, the interest here is that you must be able to follow what we do, and we do so in a manner that is open and transparent, consistent with the Constitution of this country. Honorable members, there is no changes. If you want to raise a point of order, as we've been doing since April 2020, you do so by show of hand. You raise a hand in your device, or you do so by indicating in the chat room that you would like to raise a point of order, and the presiding officers will be able to recognize you. The languages are available in the online. For the honorable members that are here in person in the chamber, the system works as per usual, and the honorable members who are connected virtually, it is per the usual approach that we've been following. You go to your teams and you follow the instruction, which is fairly easy. Again, the ICT is ready to assist. Honorable members, I recognize the Honorable Chief Whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding the provisions of the standing rules, I move without notice that the debate be given precedence.
Thank you, the Honorable Chief Whip. Honorable members, are there any objections? No objections, agreed to. I must appreciate that the leader of the opposition, who has moved for this debate, you elected to choose us here, to join us in the chamber. We appreciate that. And I wish all the members who lead the interpellations or motions of this magnitude for debate would actually do so in future. I also would like to welcome the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, who is here with us in the chamber. And thank you very much for making sure that I'm not alone here. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I recognize the leader of the opposition.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Speaker, on behalf of the African National Congress, I rise today to introduce this debate on the proposed amendment to Section 25 of the Constitution of our Republic, the introduction of the expropriation bill in the National Assembly, and to discuss here today with the representatives of the people of the Western Cape how these pieces of legislation will be helpful in addressing the dreadful patterns of land ownership disparity in our province. In this week, when we remember the Land Act of 1913, which came into effect on the 20th of June, 1913, we welcome this important debate. Allow me to remind this House of the words of Saul Plaatje on the 1913 Land Act, when he said, Speaker, and I quote, "Awaking on Friday morning, June the 20th, 1913, the South African native found himself not actually a slave, but a pariah in the land of his birth," end quote. Sadly, we believe, Speaker, that once again the ruling party in this province, the DA, tried to squash this debate at the Programming Committee, and it was the courage of the legislature staff that ensured that we discuss this important issue today. With regard to patterns of urban land ownership in the Western Cape, we have a situation where white South Africans own 70.7% of such land, while so-called colored South Africans own only 10.7% of the land, Indians 8%, and Africans 3.5%.
Honorable, the leader of the opposition, would you please take your seat?
Speaker.
There is a point of order by the Honorable, the Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on a point of order because it appears that the Honourable Doug Moore is misleading the House. The Programming Authority had absolutely no objection to the debate, so I'm not quite sure what point he was trying to make there.
Thank you, Honorable Chief Whip. I would like to recognize the leader of the opposition. I think that is a statement that you've made, but it can be argued by anyone from the speakers from your party. May proceed, Honorable the leader of the opposition.
Thank you, Speaker. I hope we're just holding the time, but I actually believe that on a point of order, there should be a ruling as to whether the Chief Whip's point of order was in fact a point of order.
The point that I'm making is the statement that has been made, Honorable the leader of the opposition, by the Honorable Chief Whip of the Majority Party. That is a point for debate. There is no rule broken, but I think what is important is the members who will speak on behalf of her party may have an opportunity to argue in either for or against your view. But there's no rule that has been broken here as such. You may please proceed.
Thank you, Speaker. That's why we have a debate, and the Honourable MEC is free to respond. So I've said that in the urban situation, white South Africans own 70.7 of such land. Colored South Africans only 10.7%, Indian South Africans 8.8%, and Africans 3.5%. The patterns, Speaker, are even worse when it comes to agricultural land. So this is a ticking time bomb that all of us should recognize, irrespective of party affiliation. These patterns of land ownership simply cannot go on as they have. They are simply unsustainable. In fact, the wars of conquest and dispossession started long before 1913. The descendants of the Khoi and the San in the main remain landless. The ANC wants to state emphatically, Speaker, the following. Firstly, we will do everything, especially in regards to land reform and redistribution, within the confines of the law. That is why the amendment to the Constitution and the passing into law of the Expropriation Bill are so important. Secondly, the ANC will not encourage, nor will we promote or tolerate the illegal occupation of land or the illegal confiscation of land. Unlike what the DA is saying, the ANC government will not go after people's property indiscriminately. The ANC will ensure that expropriation of land happens within a clear set of criteria that will do all, and we will do all of this within the stated objective of ANC policy to ensure that food security, investment in the agricultural sector, and that the investment climate is not affected. Expropriation without compensation, Speaker, is but one of a number of tools to advance the three objectives of the land transformation policy, which are restitution, redistribution, and security of tenure. The amendment to the Constitution is about providing clarity under which circumstances expropriation without compensation will happen, in other words, with no compensation. The final report of the Presidential Panel on Land Reform and Agriculture has provided clear proposals as to the circumstances in which expropriation without compensation should take place. The expropriation bill will also be aligned to these recommendations once the consultation process has been concluded. The Institute of Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies lent its support for the tabling of this bill. And according to PLAS, and I quote, they say the bill represents an important step that could potentially give new impetus to the land reform process. Speaker, the ANC believes that the amendment to Section 25 and the passing of the expropriation bill into law will not only assist South Africa in addressing the land question, which remains integral to a process of decolonization, but will also imbue the constitutional imperative of addressing past injustices. Let us, Speaker, work together to find each other, like we did previously when we reached a political settlement and adopted our Constitution in 1996. It is clear that if in this particular province we provide the leadership, and I want to challenge the Premier on this, we should be having engagements with the agricultural sector, workers, organized agriculture, black farmers, and we should be sitting down. En ons moet eintlik vra, hoe gaan ons die probleem van die grond oplos? Ons moenie klippe vir mekaar gooi nie, want as ons nie die probleem oplos, gaan ons 'n groter probleem skep in ons provinsie. So ek vra, kom ons vat hande en kom ons los die probleem op. Baie dankie, Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Dagmar. Honorable members, I now recognize the Honorable Minister of Agriculture.
Honorable Speaker, I welcome this debate in the House today. Honorable Speaker, there comes moments in history that you as a politician cannot sit by and see your own country at a crossroads. Worst is to see your country going into the wrong direction. This is not fear-mongering, because we have the lived experience of seeing in our recent history a path gone horribly wrong. This government in the Western Cape committed itself to data, evidence, and facts. Our recent history in Zimbabwe and Venezuela gave us the data, the evidence, and the facts. The recent history of Zimbabwe and Venezuela taught us that expropriation without compensation will have disastrous consequences, that politicians and not citizens are the main beneficiaries. It taught us that land ends up in the wrong hands and cause food insecurity and hunger. It's teaching us that corruption in land administration and redistribution is endemic. It teaches us that economies in those countries have collapsed. It teaches us that expropriation without compensation leads to runaway inflation. It teaches us that politicians use expropriation without compensation to drag the masses into voting for a failed state. That food insecurity is severely being compromised. Let us be clear. Expropriation without compensation and the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution has absolutely nothing to do with land reform and land restitution in South Africa. The Democratic Alliance fully supports and endorses land reform and land restitution within the current constitutional framework. The Western Cape government has the evidence and the data of 2 independent studies that confirmed that successful land reform is possible within the current constitutional dispensation. What is needed is a capable state, a committed farmer, a mentor, a support program, water security, access to finance, and extension and advisory services to all our farmers. Our system of land reform works because we are committed to redress. I now call on all reasonable people in South Africa to wake up, because the reasonable people remain quiet in Zimbabwe, and that country is now a failed state, hyperinflation and food insecurity. I now call on the banking industry to publicly raise your opposition to EWC, as it will destroy the banking industry in South Africa. I now call on the South African Reserve Bank and its Monetary Policy Committee to raise the risk of the South African monetary policy in South Africa under expropriation without compensation. I now call on the faith-based sectors to stop EWC as their own properties. Places of worship will also now be nationalized. I call on all farmers to oppose EWC, as it will lead to food insecurity in South Africa. I now call on all businesses to oppose EWC, because it will nationalize all businesses, both small businesses, commercial farmers, and small-scale farming practices and enterprises in South Africa. I now call on the academic and research community to oppose expropriation without compensation, as it rejects scientific evidence and the research on land reform. The research on expropriation without compensation shows that it puts more people in absolute poverty, and corrupt politicians are benefiting from EWC. Finally, I call on the international community to urgently raise expropriation without compensation as a governance risk for future investments in South Africa. I now call on the international community to flag EWC in bilateral discussions with the head of state, the national executive, and with DIRCO. I now call on the international community to send a high-level delegation to conduct a fact-finding mission on expropriation without compensation in South Africa. I now call on the international community to put a motion in their respective parliaments, warning their institutions about the dangers of expropriation without compensation in South Africa. I now call on the international community to invoke international bilateral international agreements that protect private property rights. South Africa is a net exporter of agricultural products. 50% of all South Africa's agricultural products goes onto the African continent, and EWC will severely compromise the food security on the African continent. But reasonable people in South Africa and elsewhere in the world want to know, why is the ANC calling for the amendment of the Constitution, Section 25, in terms of expropriation without compensation? Why do they allow these things despite all these warnings? The answer is derived from political history. When liberation parties see the signs of electoral defeat, they come up with irrational and unconstitutional means to stay in power. Liberation movements come into power with noble ideas of mass-based empowerment. History books are full of how liberation parties quickly taste the sweetness of power, money, and security, and then abandon the dreams of liberation politics. They become instant millionaires, and shares in state-owned entities becomes the norm, like the recently announced South African Airways deal. When the funds to maintain the lifestyle of corrupt politicians dry up, alternative plans are made to appease the electorate. The Arab Spring in North Africa comes to mind, and the ANC is now using EWC as a political tool to buy votes in the upcoming election in October. EWC is not a tool for economic empowerment. EWC is a tool for political survival of the African National Congress as it is fearing the Arab Spring in South Africa. EWC lessons from history taught us that more people end up in poverty and the governing party ultimately is removed and the leaders end up in prison. But we have a choice, Honorable Speaker, to take these amendments to the court, and we will challenge it as a Democratic Alliance in the High Court, in the Appeal Court, and in the Constitutional Court, as well as in the International Court of Justice. I now call on members of this House who support expropriation without compensation, Speaker, to offer their own properties via the office of the Speaker of this House by the end of this debate, so that we can surrender it to the National Department of Land Affairs, so that the state becomes the custodian of all your properties. Let us test your commitment to your statement in support for expropriation without compensation. Put your money and your property where your mouth is. Mr. Speaker, I now call on you to submit to me tomorrow a list of the members of this House who have offered their properties in line with the recommendations of expropriation without compensation. Honorable Speaker, I will await your response in writing.
There is a point of order, Honorable Minister. What is the point of order?
Istethi ndiyafuna ukubuza ukuba mnumzana Mhlekazi uza kuthatha umbuzo wami.
Honorable the Minister, the Honorable member is asking whether you will be able to take a question.
No.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. You may proceed.
Honorable Speaker, I've asked you for a list of those members in this House that want to surrender their own properties for expropriation without compensation, and that we submit that list of those questions to the National Department of Land Affairs. Put your money where your mouth is. Honorable Speaker, I have a letter to you addressed. I'm asking you to submit tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock a list, even if you receive a no return, a list of all those members who speak in this debate that want to offer their own properties for expropriation without compensation to me. Honorable Speaker, the ANC has been hijacked by the EFF. ANC policies are now made by the EFF. I salute former President Thabo Mbeki, who came out publicly and denounced the plans of the ANC to nationalize land. He even went so far to say expropriation without compensation is not the policy of the African National Congress, and it is against the Freedom Charter.
Thank you.
I'm asking voters in South Africa.
Your time is up, Minister.
I'm asking voters in South Africa to effect electoral change in South Africa and vote out the ANC. I thank you.
Honorable Minister. Honorable members, I now recognize the Honorable Member Heron.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I think the Minister for Agriculture will be surprised to learn that expropriation without compensation or expropriation with nil compensation is already the law in South Africa. So if the DA is intending to go to the High Court and the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court has already ruled on this matter. There's actually no need for the amendment to Section 25 of the Constitution. In 2002, the Constitutional Court interpreted the Constitution as making provision for expropriation without compensation. The court said that there are appropriate circumstances where it is permissible for legislation in the broader public interest to deprive persons of property without payment of compensation. And the reason why the banking sector won't rise to the minister's call is because the First National Bank of South Africa was one of the parties to that litigation. The matter is settled law, and it has been for 19 years, since 2002. It is settled by legal precedent. In fact, the Constitution's 18th Amendment Bill is so unnecessary, it literally says so. The preamble to the bill says that the amendment is intended to make explicit that which is implicit. Speaker, land reform is a compelling and urgent issue. In the debate about EWC, no one is arguing that this constitutional obligation is progressing appropriately. There's consensus amongst all political parties that progress has been unacceptably slow and chaotic. However, those who are blaming the Constitution for retarding the progress are lying. It's unfortunate that land reform, so urgent and so necessary, has been hijacked as a tool for political gain by those claiming it's retarded by the Constitution, by those who use the debate to hide their failings, and by those who claim to be constitutionalists and who have whipped up unnecessary anxiety and fear based on lies. The proposed amendment adds nothing to the task that all governments are required to tackle, redressing an unsustainable and indefensible land ownership pattern in South Africa.
Thank you, Honorable Heron.
Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable members, I now recognize Honorable Christians.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, the ACDP does not support any amendment to Section 25 of the Constitution that would allow for land expropriation without compensation. We do acknowledge there is a need for reformation and restitution on the land question, but we oppose we oppose the way this government wants to implement it. A failure to protect property rights and the issue to title deeds to property owners destroys the value of such property. How can we give more powers to an incompetent and corrupt State Department to now expropriate land without compensation? The problems we are facing today is because of a lack of leadership. And also, there's no collaboration between the different spheres of government. South Africa needs decisive leadership. And the party, the ANC, is so divided amongst themselves and have different policy outlooks. This makes it even worse. The ACDP is committed to a just, equitable, transparent, and corruption-free land distribution with compensation. We, as the ACDP, we believe if you want to unite this country, you want to build this country, we want to grow this country, we need to work together to enjoy a safe and healthy and prosperous South Africa. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Christians. Honorable members, I now recognize the Honorable Maseko.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Speaker, it is a lack of implementation, not policy, which has stopped redress. Land expropriation is not a new concept. Governments have been expropriating land to build roads, schools, and other services for decades. Expropriation, if done correctly, does not cause panic or lead to disinvestment and is ultimately in the interest of residents. Land reform done correctly is a powerful economic tool which empowers and creates generational wealth. The DA is not opposed to land reform or expropriation. In fact, our governments do it all the time, and we do it better than the rest. And why is that the case, Speaker? It's because we genuinely care about righting the wrongs of the past. The same can be said of the ANC. Through this bill, the ANC offers us reminders of the days when home ownership was for a select few. It reminds us of the times when only an elite could truly own their land. And it reminds us of a time when the majority could be forcefully removed at government's sole discretion. This time, the difference only that the color of your skin is substituted for political connections. Probably if you are an ANC cadre, you will keep your land. But if not, the all-powerful state led by the ANC may very well take it away from you. And that's why we oppose the use of this dangerous draft legislation. It does nothing but build a political bridge between the ANC and the EFF. Let's be honest. The bill is the result of a dying organization called the African National Congress, an organization confused and hopelessly clinging to any lifeboat in a sea of populism. The cost of ANC desperation will not lead to justice for those dispossessed or redress for those that had their homes denied to them under the apartheid regime. Speaker, even the ANC itself is conflicted over this bill. Former President Thabo Mbeki warned against these amendments, saying that zero compensation on land, which has been improved by its owners, could lead to international disinvestment in South Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa appears to have lost control, as despite claim that these amendments would never include state custodianship, ANC members added this to the bill recently. Speaker, President Ramaphosa has not only lost his iPad, he has lost control of the national governing party, and quite honestly, he has lost the plot. Since 1994, the national government has had access to 700,000 hectares of land. The ANC does not lack resources, but has spectacularly failed to implement redress and reform. This exposes the ANC's motives for what they are, a flashy show without any substance. Redress is possible if it is done through fairly and transparently. That is why the DA government has always prioritized title deeds for deserving beneficiaries. In the past 5 years, we have handed over title deeds to more than 37,000 residents, and another 8,100 residents will become proud homeowners this year. Nearly 95,000 housing opportunities have been handed over in the last 5 years, and since 2009, the DA-led Western Cape government has released approximately 360 hectares of land for housing development. Despite this work, the housing crisis in the country has grown as poverty and unemployment rates have skyrocketed, which is why the Provincial Department of Environmental Affairs and Planning has called on the public to comment on its inclusionary housing policy framework. The aim of the policy is to help municipalities in the Western Cape develop more affordable housing units in the partnership with the private sector. But how can the private sector develop property when they do not have security of ownership? Land reform in South Africa has not been a failure because the national government did not have access to land. Land reform has been a failure because of maladministration, budget cuts, corruption, and a lack of political will from the ANC national government to place residents above cadres. Take District 6 for example. On average, it takes 1,500 days or just a little more than 4 years to complete a housing development. In the next 2 weeks, the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development will hand over houses in District 6 for the first time in 9 years. More than double the average development period was needed to build 106 housing opportunities for residents which have been waiting to go home for 60 years. This is a land reform and restitution according to ANC. It is a failure, one which the National Department does not wish to engage on. This bill has nothing to do with land reform or redress. It is just political electioneering by the ANC in a desperate attempt to remain relevant. It is about ANC looting land as they looted every resource in this country. I thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Maseko. Honorable members, I now recognize Honorable Mvimbi.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Speaker, the ANC welcomes the debate in this House today on such an important issue. an issue that affects the majority of our people, especially in this province. As the Honorable Doug Moore pointed out, Africans possesses only 3.5% of urban land, Coloureds 10.7%, Indians 8%, while whites are owning 70% of urban land in the Western Cape, yet only accounting for only 15% of the population. 70% of the land in the Western Cape is owned by 15% of the population. In a question to the Honorable MEC for Agriculture earlier this year, the Honorable Van der Westhuizen asked the MEC whether his department was consulted regarding the suitability and or training needs of prospective farmers on state-owned farms. The MEC's response to the Honorable Van der Westhuizen was that the reason why Minister Thoko Didiza released no farms in the Western Cape and Gauteng was that, and I would like to quote, there was no state land available to be released for purposes of land reform to these provinces, I close quote. If ever there was a need for a valid reason for expropriation of land without compensation, then the Honorable Minister Mayor provided the reason. But expropriation without compensation for urban purposes is as important as expropriation without compensation for agricultural purposes. The ANC will therefore certainly continue to lobby national government, especially Minister De Lille, to free up the pockets of land in Bergvlek, Camps Bay, Oranjezeg, Parow, Cape Town, Simonstown, Southfield, Tamboerskloof, and Zeekoevlei for purposes of land reform. According to MEC Simmers, a decision has still not been taken by the National Department to release this land. MEC Simmers continue to indicate that the piece of land in Oranjezeg has been secured by his department, and we will be awaiting the preliminary feasibility study. But the ANC will certainly push for this land in particular to be used for integrated housing. Instead, what we are seeing in the city of Cape Town is the using of pockets of land for integrated human settlement. It is auctioned off, these pieces of land, to the highest bidder. So uncommitted is the city to integrated human settlement that despite lockdown regulation, the mayoral committee member is writing to sub-council announcing online auctions. The ANC will oppose these auctions. Speaker, the expropriation of urban land is of particular importance to us because it can be used for the purpose of integrated human settlement. It is a mockery that 27 years into our democracy, the poor are still thrown into the periphery of the town, while pockets of land in town are not used for social and integrated housing purposes.
Please take your seat. Honorable Mvimbi, there is a point of order. Honorable Bartman, what's your point of order?
Speaker, I wanted to find out if Honorable Mvimbi will take a question.
Thank you, Honorable Bartman. Honorable Mvimbi.
I overruled that. Overruled, Speaker. May I continue?
You may proceed, Honorable Mvimbi. That's the response, Honorable. Honorable Mvimbi, please continue with your seat. There's another point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last I checked, you were the presiding officer, not the honourable member. Can the honourable member overrule another one?
Thank you, Honorable Chief Whip. I think that was just a reference and the use of words, but otherwise, the assumption is that the honourable member is not taking the question, but it's not providing a ruling. Thank you, Honourable Chief Whip.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
The mic was muted. I mean, the watch was paused, and then you may proceed from the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker.
Please
in
proceed.
March of this year, MEC Simmers reported that over 1,000 land invasion took place on land belonging to the city of Cape Town. While the majority of this land is on the outskirts of the city, the question remains why the city has not used some of the land to build houses. The MEC went on to report that the piece of land in Lavender Hill belonging to his department is not suitable for housing because of its size, but that if the land is devolved to the city of Cape Town, maybe houses will be built. And what a contradiction. The DA stand up today to criticize the national government for not accelerating land reform and land redistribution fast enough. Yet the pockets of land mentioned earlier, as well as the piece of land in Lavender Hill, are clear cases of just how long and complicated and bureaucratic it is to devolve land. This is just a tactic to actually delay the availability of this land. The amendment to the Constitution and the Expropriation Bill will certainly assist in this regard. The ANC welcomed the amendment to Section 25 of the Constitution, as well as the introduction of the Expropriation Bill. In particular, we welcome the purpose of the bill, which is to provide for expropriation of property for both a public purpose or in the public interest, while at the same time providing for those instances where expropriation with nil compensation may be appropriate in the public interest.
You have exhausted your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Honorable members, I now recognize Honorable Murray.
Thank you, Speaker. The Freedom Front Plus rejects this amendment to the Constitution. All parties signed a deal at Kempton Park in good faith, and that faith should be honored. Now liberty seems to have died with Nelson Mandela. Section 25 of the Constitution was blessed by the father of the nation, Mr. Mandela. However, it seems that whatever satisfied the political aspirations of these giants like Thabo Mbeki and Walter Sisulu does obviously not satisfy the insatiable lust for power of men with pseudo-credibility and vengeance as their only goal. This much is reflected in the objectives of this bill. They want to wipe aside justifiable and equitable. Those trust is the issue in this debate, not fancy legal terminology. The ANC has not earned the trust of the people of this country. They failed us politically, socially, and economically. And they had the temerity to ask us again, please trust us with expropriation. We will not give the farms to comrades like we gave Mr. Kluti's farm to MK Soldier, Kalako. Mr. Speaker, state-owned enterprises are virtually all bankrupt. It's been destroyed economically over the past 27 years. Ironically, this is the same length of time Nelson Mandela spent on Robben Island, considering and pondering over a constitution model, which included Section 25. Mr. Speaker, only the politically naive, the intellectually handicapped, or blind disciples of the ANC and the EFF alliance will be prepared to risk dumping South Africa in a state of food insecurity, foreign disinvestment, and possible civil unrest by this land grabbing.
Honorable Murray, you have exhausted your time. My apologies, you have exhausted your time. Thank you.
I am exhausted too, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable members, I now recognize the Honorable Van der Westhuizen.
Honorable Speaker, as a result of past policies of dispossession, the debate regarding land is an emotive one. Therefore, one could perhaps understand why the ANC adopted the expropriation without compensation motion at its 2017 National Conference. But to do so would be to completely ignore the ANC's failure in addressing the past injustices, as Honorable Heron referred to earlier. It is sometimes urged that there is a huge land hunger and that the only way to avoid widespread violence is to have a radical program of expropriation. But as countless surveys have found, is that land reform and agricultural opportunities are low on the list of popular demands. What is at the top of the list is the desire to be employed. Speaker, let it be clear, again, as Honourable Heron has confirmed, it's the ANC that is the obstacle to land reform, not our constitution. Our constitution provides for expropriation of land, and I quote from section 25, for public purposes or in the public interest. But what is more, the constitution demands of government to specifically address the ownership patterns referred to by Honourable Dugmore in his motion. Let me quote from section 25(4), where it states clearly, and public interest includes the nation's commitment to land reform and to reforms to bring about equitable access to all South Africa's natural resources. Again, it is the ANC that's the obstacle to land reform, not our constitution. For many centuries, agriculture has been the major economic activity that drove human progress. However, the importance of land as a factor that would determine one's prospects in life has decreased significantly. In a modern economy, land is often a burden. We see the expenses that many, including government, have to incur to protect their land from invasions. Land is subject to rates and taxes, and sometimes costs, such as with invasive alien vegetation, the costs of fire breaks, insurance, etc., which shows that land must be utilized or developed in order to generate an income. And this, more often than not, requires extreme capital investments. In short, ownership of land is not always an unqualified blessing. That is why more than 90% of beneficiaries of land restitution, given the choice between land and money, have chosen to accept the money. Given this, even Honourable Dugmore will apprehend that land ownership patterns will always remain skewed. For land reform to succeed, we require a competent and corruption-free government. It requires ideological and political will from the government of the day to achieve real reform. Unfortunately, the ANC has failed on both counts. We see an ANC government that's been evicting emerging black farmers from government-owned land. Farmers such as Mr. Sveli Mabaso in Mpumalanga, Uyani Zagana in KZN, and many others. We see an ANC government that has gone so far as to even ignore court orders to honor 18-year-old contracts to sell land to Mr. David Rakgatse. We see an ANC government that's been prioritizing the interests of previously advantaged MK veterans above the interests of farmer Ivan Klute of Darling. We see an ANC government that has seen a failure rate of 90% of its land reform projects, and the percentage would have been significantly lower if it was not boosted by the Western Cape's 62% success rate on agricultural land reform projects. Fortunately for us, the Western Cape Department of Agriculture has the capacity to truly support emerging farmers, and it knows that successful land reform initiatives require partnerships and mentoring. Honourable Speaker, South Africa has many challenges, and successful land reform that will increase production is one of them. But the biggest challenge, and the one in which government has failed dismally since the Zuma era, is to increase economic growth. The tampering with constitutional rights and the threat of increasing corruption-driven land grabs all contribute to disinvestment and unemployment. The ANC's threats to limit the sizes of productive farms, the double talk, and the ANC succumbing to the EFF's demands for all land to be state-owned all contribute to unemployment and poverty. The ANC has led South Africa to a position where we find ourselves with one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. And as unemployment rises, so does the inequality amongst our people. This is the real skewed pattern. Unemployment and not the access to land is the real elephant in the room. What we need is economic certainty, stability, and investments. What we need for greater equality is economic growth. Honourable Speaker, the world has changed significantly over the last few years. Successful farming now requires serious capital investments. While land still carries a lot of emotion, skills, and knowledge have become the biggest assets if one wants to better your chances in life. If we really care about the future, if we really care about the next generation, we should ensure that the next generation is equipped with the latest knowledge and the skills needed for a modern economy. That is where our focus and energy should be. That is what would allow a child to reach his or her full potential and to escape poverty. That, however, is asking too much from an ANC whose representatives are more in fear of their next National Congress than to put the future of our country first. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable van der Westhuizen. Honorable members, I now recognize Honorable Brenkes.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, all perfect praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of the worlds, and may his blessings and peace be upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and upon all his family and companions. Taking possession of people's property unlawfully is among the major sins. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and do not eat up your property among yourselves for vanities, nor use it as bait for the judges, with intent that ye may eat up wrongfully and knowingly a little of people's property. Moreover, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, He who took a span of earth wrongly would be made to wear around his neck 7 earths on the day of resurrection. It is imperative that the usurper gives the above land to its rightful owner, since he, the usurper, has committed a great sin, which he must undo immediately. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam also said, none of you should take the property of his brother in amusement nor in earnest. If anyone takes the staff of his brother, he should return it. And he is also obliged to compensate the rightful owner for any damages. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Brenkes. Honorable members, I now recognize Honorable Maran.
Thank you, Speaker. Good afternoon, Premier, Speaker, members present. Speaker, the intention of the expropriation bill is not only to assist, but what can be referred to as traditional expropriation, to ensure the building of roads and infrastructure, but the bill can also be referred to as a transformatory bill. Speaker, the Honourable Sekou is correct when she's saying that expropriation have happened before, and therefore, Speaker, it will happen again. Speaker, it's wrong for the MEC to mobilize the international community. And basically his call, Speaker, for that is smoke and mirrors. Also, Speaker, for the MEC to ask ANC members who are majority black in this house to surrender their property is exactly what the apartheid government have done for black people to surrender their property. And therefore, the DA is nothing different from the apartheid government. Speaker, the data basically that's been gathered by the MEC should tell him how skewed the land ownership is in this country, Speaker. But the MEC is not interested in that particular data. The Honourable Hendricus, Speaker, is suggesting that the black majority should remain pariahs in the country of birth. He's suggesting, Speaker, that they should remain labourers and be paid a minimum wage that's equal to the old pension grant. That's basically what the DMA members is suggesting. Speaker, the Western Cape government claims to be the best, to have the best land reform projects in the country. Yet they have not bought a single piece of land to assist land reform. Every single piece of land in this province bought for land reform has been bought by the national government through the land redistribution for agriculture development, in short LRAD program, the equity schemes program, and also your proactive land acquisition strategy. Every time when the issue of land arises, the MEC will get excited about the Western Cape government's land reform program, claiming that it is the best in the country. Asking the MEC where these projects are situated, the same MEC won't be able to tell. Smoke and mirrors it is, nothing else. For the last 10 years, this government failed to successfully run both Amalienstein and Waikal, both situated in the Southern Cape, yet they claim to be the best. Speaker, in 2018, the African Farmers Association of South Africa told the MEC for Economic Opportunities, Ellen Windy, that black people only owns 1% of agricultural land.
Honorable Maran, will you please take your seat? Honorable Bosman, is that a point of order?
Yes, Speaker. Speaker, I'd like to know if the Honorable Maran is prepared to take a question.
No.
Thank you, Honorable Bosman.
1% of agricultural land in the Western Cape.
Maran, have you responded to the Honorable Member?
Yes, I've said no, Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Maran. You may proceed.
Thanks. Speaker, in 2018, the African Farmers Association of South Africa told the then MEC of Economic Opportunities, Ellen Winder, that black people only owns 1% of agricultural land in the Western Cape. The then MEC, who is now the Premier, said in response, and I quote, the NDP has set a target of 20% transfer of agricultural land to previously disadvantaged South Africans by 2013, a goal which we are determined to contribute towards. I want to urge all of our partners, such as AFASA, to work together to escalate the number of successful land reform projects, quote end. In the meantime, this provincial government has pledged its commitment to the NDP. Earlier this year, the ANC requested from the Premier's MEC, from the MEC of Agriculture, for the latest update on various land audits, which have been completed so that an accurate picture of land ownership of private land in the Western Cape can be compiled in terms of race, gender, and nationality. Dismissively, the MEC for Agriculture in the province, the Honourable Dr. Ivan Meyer, stated that his department does not keep such records. He said, and I quote, the department does not have a list of municipal-owned land that is leased to farmers, as the municipalities manage their own communals' land. The department only supports beneficiaries who do have access to land, end quote. Indeed, Speaker, the ANC understands all too well that this MEC for Agriculture does not create beneficiaries. He just babysits them, the majority of them coming from a particular race. The MEC went on to state that, and I quote, the information asked by the ANC on land patterns is housed with the Deeds Office, which is part of the National Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. The department therefore does not have access to the above mentioned information, close quote. In other words, while the Premier is pushing for a 20% target of agricultural land to previously disadvantaged South Africans, his MEC is dismissive and gives true indication of this DA-led administration and lack of commitment to land reform and redistribution. In fact, reading the MEC's answer, he is not even interested in information requested by the ANC. If he was, he himself would have inquired and requested the information from the National Department. But land reform is integral to the sustainability of the agricultural sector in this province. But the MEC for Agriculture is not interested in this. Our policy as the ANC is clear that expropriation without compensation should not impact negatively on food security, the agricultural economy, and the investment drive that our country has embarked on. Therefore, Speaker, all hands should be on deck, including this government led by Premier Windy. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Maran. Honorable members, I now recognize the Honorable Minister Simars.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Premier, Honorable Cabinet colleagues, Honorable members on both sides of the House. Speaker, it is former President Nelson Mandela who said, and I quote, with freedom and democracy, came the restoration of the right to land, and with it, the opportunity to address the effects of centuries of dispossession and denial. At last, we can, as a people, look our ancestors in the face and say, your sacrifices were not in vain. Close quote. This means ownership has and will continue to free us from the oppressor, Honorable Speaker. The significance is that our forefathers were denied the right to own land, but now we can post 1994. The irony for me is that the very party the former president belonged to is now seeking to do the exact opposite. That is to deprive us of land ownership. Instead, now they want to have the power to expropriate land without compensation for supposedly public purpose and in the public interest. This means any property, any piece of land the national government deems fit can be taken away, and no explanation would need to be provided for doing this. Die ANC-regering wat homself voorstaan as die bevryder van die nasie, is as te ware en tree nou werklik waar as die opregte verdrukker op wat hy is. Hy wil jou nou van jou grond ontneem. Dis die ware klere van die ANC van vandag. The mere fact that ANC members and their coalition partners such as Good has no interest in empowering our people shows their lack of regard for Madiba. This is part of the reason why Good's party leader, as the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, has still not transferred any developable land for human settlement purposes in the Western Cape. They are not interested in helping our people to improve their lives. Geensins. Speaker, Madiba knew that land ownership is a critical factor to continue freeing us from the oppressor, as through ownership, a myriad of further opportunities, economic and others alike, can be created. It means our people can be fully empowered. Omdat die ANC vir byna 30 jaar misluk het en nou deur 'n kleiner partytjie wat nie eers vandag aan hierdie debat deelneem nie, onder druk geplaas word, kom hulle nou met 'n voorstel wat argaïs van aard is voort. Speaker, our entire focus as the Western Cape government is to empower our people by handing over title deeds so that they can finally own land, so that they can leave a legacy for the children and family, and so that they are able to say, it belongs to me, not the state. In fact, over the last 2 terms, with the DA-led Western Cape government, we have ensured that 103,000 people received their title deeds. During the 2019-2020 financial year, 8,491 title deeds against a target of 7,000, I should say, was delivered, Honourable Speaker. These residents are fully fledged and legal homeowners, a privilege they are truly grateful for. But Speaker, this House does not have to take my word for it. Upon receiving a title deed, Vredebes, which is an area in Ceres, the resident is 88-year-old Ms. Margrieta Galant, said, and I quote, I feel so honored and blessed. First, I received a house, and now I am the real owner. This makes me very happy, and I appreciate it. Close quote. In Lowville, in Vredenburg, 91-year-old Ms. Hester Koester, who along with her husband waited for more than 50 years to become the rightful and legal owners of the property, said, and once again I quote, I am happy and grateful for what God has spared us thus far, and that we now have our title deed in our hands. I've always wondered when this moment will come, as it's been so long. This is a proud moment for us, as this is our house, our property, and no one can ever take it away from us again. Close quote. Speaker, wat tragies is dat sou die ANC met hierdie sinnelose voorstel sukses behaal en hulle hierdie beginsigtes van hulle grond wil ontneem, sou hierdie voorgestelde wetgewing dit moontlik maak om hulle dit kan doen. This is the biggest tragedy in all of this. As the Western Cape government, we will continue to empower our people by handing over more title deeds, as we believe that this is true transformation. It is true empowerment. In fact, for this financial year, we will ensure that in excess of 8,000 residents still become legal homeowners. Ek is juist volgende week op Sangrivier waar nog inwoners op hierdie wyse bemagtig gaan word. Speaker, the ANC continues to work against our people. Listening to the Honorable Dagmo and Mbumbi and the Honorable Maron, one can only but ponder and think, in what elusive or illusional state is the ANC in this Western Cape actually living under? They seek to evoke emotions which ultimately at the end of the day they can never control. They want to reignite old scars of the past, when yet post 1994 we were all working together to build a unified South Africa. Hulle is heeltemal van koers af. Die hele gelot, die hele ANC lot in hierdie provinsie, mees in die ander provinsies, is die pad heeltemal buister. But further to that, Honorable Speaker, the Honorable Mvumbi further goes in an example of Oranje Sig. But what the Honorable Member fails to tell the members of this House and the people of the Western Cape tuned into today's debate is that the portions of land which belongs to the city and the Provincial Department of Public Works, that has been made available to my department. But guess who is the missing party in that, who also owns land in Oranje Sig? No guesses, the National Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, want hulle is nie toegewyd tot die beginsel van ware nasiebou en ware regstelling nie. And yes, Honorable Mvumbi, my department is doing feasibility studies to exactly find out what type of product we can deliver on the portions of land we have at our disposal. Furthermore, the Honorable Mvumbi once again, and I need to thank him for bringing this to the House attention, he speaks of Lavendale. But what the Honourable Member fails to mention to the members of this House and to those citizens tuned in is that the portion of land in Lavendale was invaded, and that portion of land ultimately still belongs to the National Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. Alles wat 'n nasionale besit is of beset of is op pad om beset te word, want hulle wil dit nie oorgee vir 'n provinsiale regering wat ware transformasie vir almal moontlik gaan maak nie. But Speaker, in the Western Cape, we continue to lead in successful land reform. This is something we remain committed to, as our priority first and foremost is the people of the Western Cape. Ons gee ons mense hoop as die DA in hierdie provinsie. En die inwoners van die Weskaap, is dit ons besef, laat ons in totaliteit in elke munisipaliteit ontslae word van die ANC goed en al sy vernote en al die ANC variante in hierdie provinsie wat eers daar by idee kom klop. Hulle het nie u belange ter hart nie. In fact, Honorable Speaker, it's as if Madiba could foresee what was going to happen when he said, and I quote him once again, if the ANC does to you what the apartheid government did to you, then you must do to the ANC what you did to the apartheid government, close quote. Honorable Speaker, the ANC is no longer the liberator. They are the oppressor. They are the oppressor much worse than the government that was here pre-1994. So let's listen to what Madiba said, and I'm going to close again with this quote. If the ANC does to you what the apartheid government did to you, and one can now say under the ANC there's a new form of apartheid government, then you must do to this ANC what you did to the apartheid government. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Minister Simars. Honorable members, that concludes the debate and the speakers list. Thank you very much. We now move to the interpellations. I just want to request the honorable members who are participating to really be mindful of Rule 63 in terms of our standing rules. I have the interpellation in the name of Honorable Said to the Minister, to the Honorable Minister Schaefer, the Minister of Education. I now recognize the Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Speaker, and to the member for the question, the interpellation, which really is just a question. The answer to it, which is a no. All people who are on our records who are asking for places for the 2021 year have been offered places in a school in the Western Cape. As the member is well aware, the matter is currently under consideration by the Constitutional Court. Thank you very much, Speaker.
Thank you, the Honorable Minister, Honorable Sayed.
Thank you very much to the Honorable Minister for the response. Speaker, the challenge of unplaced learners is not just an issue of resources, and that's been the response consistently in this House. It is about the policy direction of this DA-led government to prioritize the rich at the expense of the poor. It is about poor planning and poor management of resources, and it is about a lack of political will on the part of the MEC to address the problem. Learners have been placed very late into the year, and we will actually contest that all have been placed. The Western Cape Education Department claims that we need over 800 million rand to address teacher shortages. Yet the MEC surrendered over 350 million to the Provincial Revenue Fund. The same government has set aside millions for a parallel provincial vaccine purchases, which will not be spent, as manufacturers have made it clear that they only deal with national governments. I rise today, Speaker, to call on the Premier to reinvest the 350 million rand towards addressing the education crisis in the Western Cape. Furthermore, the Premier must reprimand the MEC for wasting taxpayers' money in court to oppose a case where parents are seeking a systematic relief to address the problem of late placement of learners in the future. The MEC's replies to parliamentary questions show that a substantive amount of unplaced learners are mainly African and colored children, whilst predominantly white learners are not affected. This explains the MEC's nonchalant attitude and laid-back approach on this particular matter. She is not bothered by the fact that the constitutional right to education of thousands of learners is being violated. Not only are the rights of unplaced learners and those learners who are placed late violated, but also those of learners in overcrowded classrooms are also violated. With its elitist, liberal ideology, which denies race and class, an ideology which the MEC is schooled in as a protege of former Premier Helen Zille, the DA is using the learner placement crisis to further widen the divide and inequality gaps between rich and poor in our province. While class sizes in affluent schools remain fairly small and manageable, the WCD is forcing already overcrowded schools to take up more learners, enticing them with growth posts which are never fully fulfilled. A case in point is in Mossel Bay, Indwe High School. Overcrowding creates a prejudiced environment for learners who find themselves in overcrowded classrooms. It is not something that can be overlooked or wished away. Therefore, the MEC and the Premier must provide answers on how these issues will be addressed, how much resources will be availed, and why are former Model C schools not utilized to address the challenge. In fact, in closing on this part, Speaker, just to say, my colleagues on the opposite side of the House, MEC Fritz, MEC Fernandez, Member Mackenzie, MEC Mitchell, America, Botha, and many others on the opposite side will actually agree with me and should also put pressure on the MEC and Premier to deal decisively with overcrowding, because they see firsthand the situation in their constituencies, working class and black constituencies, which are not to be found in leafy suburbs. Thank you.
Said, will you please stand up? I kept on reminding you that you have concluded your time and you deliberately proceed. But you are here in the chamber with me, and I'm speaking on the mic, and I would like you to desist from that and stick to the time, Honorable Member, please. Thank you. Honorable Member Botha.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And I want to take the angle of the Forest Village. And Speaker, with reference to the parents of the children in Forest Village and Rosendal House, they have been offered placement for their children. Why have they not taken these places up? And is this not a requirement in the South African Schools Act? We have heard about how at Rosendal House in particular, the leaders of the group occupied a building, demanded school placement, then refused to provide any details to the WCED, and then threatened and intimidated officials when they sought to assist. In Forest Village, a WCED official trying to arrange placement of learners, Speaker, was held against his will and is car-stoned by the same leaders at the site. My question is then to the Minister, Is the Minister concerned that parties such as the ANC and Good, therefore, have failed to condemn these acts, which have prevented children from being educated as this is their constitutional right? They have chosen instead to perpetuate falsehoods to score political points at the expense of children. And then for the record of this House Speaker, there are over 2,000 KZN schools closed due to the lack of uptake, but no noise are made from the ANC, in particular on how these resources must be redirected to this province by their national colleagues. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Water. Honorable Minister.
Speaker, there were other speakers.
Thank you, Honorable Minister.
Thanks.
I have the Honorable Heron.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, Honorable Botha has chosen to make this about resources. We all know the Western Cape Education Department has a constitutional obligation to provide access to education to every child within the province. And where that child is from and why they are here are not relevant considerations. And it's really disgraceful that the Western Cape government drives this racially charged narrative around in-migration from the Eastern Cape when it is unable to meet that constitutional mandate. What we need from our government is a plan, not an excuse. And urbanization is not unique to the Western Cape. It's a global phenomenon, and it is not something that's going to be reversed. After 12 years in government in the Western Cape, it's time that the DA understood urbanization and planned for it. I've no doubt that the MEC is aware of the recent Mail and Guardian article about access to education and in-migration. And while the Western Cape whines about in-migration of 20,000 children, the Gauteng government has to prepare for 120,000 children who are entitled to an education and who relocated to that province. The problem in the Western Cape is perverted priorities. The Western Cape government is willing to spend a massive 1.3 billion on a false policing promise, acting way beyond their mandate as they remind us when something goes wrong. And this choice to create an illusion of policing was made at the expense of educating our children, something which is very much this government's mandate. Speaker, for the rational mind, the choice is obvious. Invest in the children and their future, because without education, no amount of policing will keep them and their communities safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Heron. Honorable members, I now recognize Honorable Christians.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, the question is whether there are any learners who have not been placed in schools for the 2021 academic year. The minister told us people were offered places. That is not the question. The question is there still unplaced learners in the Western Cape? Now, Speaker, the Western Cape Education Department, we know, I mean, it's 6 months before we have the 2022 academic school year. Now, it took the department almost 6 months to place learners. So it means that people are far behind. I want to hear from the minister what actions is the department going to take in order for those children to catch up. But more than that, Speaker, what is the minister and the department what are they going to do in order to ensure that we don't face the same problems year in and year out? Because every year, children are not placed, and we're playing with the lives of our children. This is not about politics. This is about proper planning. And I still believe that the department and the minister can do more when it comes to the placement of learners, because we know that this is a constitutional right of children to have basic education. And this right is taken away when they are not placed. So the question to the minister is, one, what is being done when it comes to these learners that's far behind when it comes to the academic year? And secondly, will we have the same problem where learners is not placed when we are half in the academic year. I thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Christians. Honorable members, I now recognize Honorable Said.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and many thanks to our colleague, the Honorable Christians, for that particular input. He's covered me largely. But Speaker, the WCED, and I think he spoke about planning, Honorable Christians, even for next year, and mistakes that must not be repeated. But the WCED received 422,912 applications to multiple schools for the 2022 academic year. This translates into 153,942 unique learners that applied for placement. Part of this interpellation also is to actually assist the department and the MEC to avoid the reoccurrence of other thousands of learners that are out of school at the end of the second term. The persistent challenge of unplaced learners is a constant reminder of the failures to fully transform our education system in the province and to redress the apartheid legacy. This is further entrenched in the Western Cape by the pervasive gatekeeping at our former Model C schools. Placement issues and overcrowded schools are in the previously disadvantaged communities. The MEC must tell us, why are so-called white learners allowed to attend schools that are over 8 kilometers from their residence, yet other children are ordered to find schools in their areas of residence? There is a clear example of white privilege that is enabled by the refusal to address the school's admission policies, which are used by former Model C schools for gatekeeping and rejecting applicants on the basis of race. We reiterate the calls that we have made for a uniform admissions policy in the province. This government promised, in getting to the response of my colleague, the Honorable Botha, this government promised to build a school for the thousands of learners that occupied the Rosendal House in Umfoleni, yet the department later disclosed in its plans that it would only provide 10 mobile classrooms for the schools. How is this supposed to accommodate all learners? The MEC must tell us how many additional classrooms and teaching posts were given to the schools that admitted the unplaced learners in Umfoleni and Eerste Rivier. The DA has not been honest and fully transparent about placement issues. Soon after claiming to have placed all learners in schools, reports emerged that some of the learners that were referred to some schools in those particular areas, Umfoleni and Eerste Rivier, some of the learners placed in those schools were denied places for various reasons, including the language barrier. They want to force isiXhosa learners to learn in an Afrikaans medium. That perpetuates racism in this province. You are making learners feel unwelcome. What we want to know from the MEC is if these reports were investigated and if her department followed up on the referrals to ensure that learners referred to schools were indeed accepted and placed in class. Thank you.
Honorable Said, thank you very much. Your time is up. Honorable members, I now recognize the Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and to all the members for the debate. We are, I think, all aware and agree on the fact that placement is an ongoing challenge in the face of increasing learner numbers, which is not a racist narrative or anything else. The reality is if you get more people, you need more money. That's how life works. So the face of increasing numbers, cost of employment that exceeds budget increases on a regular basis, one crisis after another that the national government has no contingency reserves for, and incompetent government by the ANC in the national sphere with their coalition partners good, as well as most other provinces. The fact that we have 2,000 schools in the Eastern Cape that have been earmarked for closure because their province is totally dysfunctional, but have not yet been closed, is appalling, and this wastes much needed money that should be distributed to us to accommodate the young people who are desperate for a good education, so they come here because they can't get it there. So it's disingenuous for the ANC and other parties to come to this house and throw stones when the cause of the difficulties we have faced is a direct result of the actions. And it is an issue of resources predominantly. We can't plan in the absence of a stable budget. It is also deeply concerning that a member of this House has made false claims about learner placement and carries on by repeatedly and falsely stating that there is no catch-up plan for learners, which has been repeated here by another member today. When it was detailed plans were discussed in the standing committee where those members were present. On the 21st of February this year, Member Syed stated in a media release that 4,000 learners go to school under trees. This is not correct at all. If he had the names of the 4,000 learners, why has he not provided it? Perhaps he has since revised it to the number of learners claimed by his ally Vanessa LaRue, who on the 6th of May claimed that there are 860 learners under the trees in Forest Village. Now, I've laid out the true facts in an affidavit to the Constitutional Court. There were far fewer than that. And all learners have been offered place in one of our schools. I cannot guarantee that they have all taken them up because some, I believe, are manipulating the situation to try and make political points. We cannot force parents to go to a school and put their child in a school if they've been offered a place and they don't take it. Now, that is complying with our constitutional obligation. What I do believe we need to ask are some serious questions about the motives behind the current court action. Vanessa LaRue of Save Our Schools fame, the one who lost the case against my predecessor in the Supreme Court of Appeal, makes regular appearances around election time under the guise of various organizations. She and Member Syed have repeatedly stated publicly that they are taking us to court, not innocent parents, trying to create the perception that they are separate organizations. But actually they aren't, they're one and the same. Now, thanks to Member Syed's keenness on social media, he posted a photo of his national ANC study group with Vanessa LaRue in attendance, not to mention the head of SATU, but that's another debate for another day. Yet despite this, they are not applicants in the case. They are citing me in my personal capacity, whilst I'm acting at all times in good faith as part of my job, and yet they fail to put their own names on the court papers, lest they get a cost order against them. There's a word for people like that other than political opportunists, and that is cowards. I'm certain that my colleague, the National Minister, would also wonder why a member of her own party is associating with someone who says things like, I'm done listening to Angie. Minister Angie should have been gone a long time ago. You are not fit for office when you become a liability, period. And Angie, Debbie, and their friends can go to hell on social media. Two pillars of society. But most tellingly, despite claims by the ANC that there is only a problem in the Western Cape, the National Minister has confirmed this week in her reply to a member of the National Assembly that there were in fact a number of other provinces that had not placed all their learners either at the start of the school year, and learners in KZN, Free State and Gauteng remained unplaced once schools had opened. Where is the outrage about that? And where is the Constitutional Court case, the Human Rights Commission referral, and the Public Service Commission complaint?
Will you please take your seat? There is a point of order. What's your point of
Chair,
order?
is the Honourable MEC willing to take a question on the National Minister and whether it is opposed?
No, she's not.
She's answering.
Thank you.
No, she's not.
Honourable Minister?
No, she's not. Thank you, Speaker.
All right. You may proceed, Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Speaker. The fact that other provinces did not report unplaced learners also highlights that they seemingly don't have the same kind of financial constraints, and therefore they should be giving some of their money to us. That is what needs to be investigated, and I would hope that the members in this House would take that up with their national colleagues. It is completely untrue, and Honourable Syed is like a stuck record with this 350 million. We've explained how many times it is normal business practice to limit your cost of employment amount, and as a result of that, it's also well within accepted management norms to spend within 2% of your budget. Yes, Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. You need to wrap up.
Am I done? Oh dear. Okay, Speaker. I think then, yeah, I just want to reiterate that there's absolutely no political will, absolutely no lack of political will whatsoever, and we're doing absolutely everything possible to ensure this doesn't happen in future. Thank you, Speaker.
The time is up. Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Minister, and thanks to the honourable members who participated in the interpellation. Now that concludes this interpellation and the interpellations. We now move to the questions. Honourable Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, honourable members. We now move to questions as printed on the order paper. I wish to advise the honourable members there are 4 opportunities for follow-up questions, and the honourable member who posed the initial oral question as printed on the question paper will have the first opportunity for the follow-up question. So I move on to the first one. I recognise the Honourable, the Minister Schaefer.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and thank you for the question. The answer to the question is yes, there are 9 teachers who have been found guilty of improper conduct, sexual harassment, after a formal disciplinary hearing from 2014 to date, who are still currently employed by the department. Sanctions imposed by independent presiding officers in these cases included final written warning with a fine, final written warning with a fine, suspension and counselling, and final written warning, a fine and suspension without remuneration. In other words, all cases resulted in final written warning and in some cases additional penalties beyond this. The transgressions were varied, ranging from making inappropriate comments to pulling on a learner's leg. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honourable Said. Honourable Said declines. Any further follow-up questions? My apologies. Give me a second. I just want to see, is that Honourable? I can't hear you. Honourable Botha. Thank you. Honourable Botha.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I'd like to know from the Minister, what is the role of the Provincial Minister regarding the occurrence of such cases, please?
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The process works as follows. Disciplinary cases are conducted by an independent presiding officer appointed by the WCED. After a guilty finding, then the presiding officer must impose a sanction on behalf of the employer. And then in terms of Section 25(2) of the Employment of Educators Act, there is a right of appeal to the Provincial Minister, which is my only involvement in the matter, against the finding by a presiding officer and against sanction imposed in terms of the Act. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. I see Honourable Christians.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Just a question. The sanctions imposed upon the teachers, if the minister and the minister said the role, but if there's not appropriate action taken, and it's or the sanction is not appropriate, what is the next step for the learner or a teacher or something to take a next step if they think that the sanction was not appropriate or severe enough? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. As I said, there are rights of appeal. They're not the individual complainant can appeal, but the department can appeal. So either the department can appeal to me if they feel that the sanction is not strict enough, or the person who's found guilty can appeal to me if they are of the view that it is too strict. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Allen.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. To the Minister, is the Minister able to elaborate on the responsibility of the South African Council of Educators when it comes to such cases? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker and Honourable Allen. The South African Council for Educators has a different role. There are certain offences that have to be automatically referred to them by provincial departments, and that is any disciplinary matter which has a sanction of more serious than a warning or reprimand. But there are also opportunities for any person who believes that a teacher has breached the Code of Professional Ethics to report this to SACE for an investigation, which will be a separate investigation. And they then have a separate disciplinary process also, which could also lead to a teacher being struck from the role. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. And Honourable Bosman.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Through you to the Minister. Can the Minister perhaps tell us whether the National Department of Education has a database of teachers that have been found guilty of misconduct to prevent those teachers from finding work in other provinces?
Minister.
Not to my knowledge, Deputy Speaker, but if there are sexual offences, then they should go through various sexual offences processes, and SACE would also have it. If people are dismissed, of course, then there is opportunity for that to be put on PERSAL, which is a national system, and which then can prevent people being employed in other provinces also. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. That concludes question 1. We move over to question 2. I recognise the Honourable Minister Mitchell.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I want to answer this question. Firstly, let me thank Honourable Mvimbi for the question. I want to answer it in two parts. I think it's important to just give background information to the ongoing taxi violence. Deputy Speaker, it's important for me to point out that we are duty-bound as government to ensure a safe and reliable public transport system in the Western Cape. I must also stress that most taxi operators are law-abiding citizens who work hard to make a living and provide for their families. Over the last couple of years, public transport in the Western Cape has been marred by ongoing taxi violence between associations affiliated to CATA and CODETA. The sectarian taxi wars have claimed many lives and have disrupted travel patterns. The main reason for the increase in taxi-related violence has been the expansion of these mother bodies into other geographical regions. This has resulted in extortion, route invasions, and an exponential increase in illegal operations, competition for passengers, the monopolization of minibus taxi routes, violence, damage to property, and the loss of human lives. As a result, Deputy Speaker, taxi associations and operators in these invaded areas have opted to join one of these mother bodies in fear of personal safety. These are carefully planned and coordinated criminal activities that have become endemic features of the taxi industry in the Western Cape and South Africa. Violence is used to gain respect in the taxi industry, and these mother bodies establish parallel regulatory systems where operators are charged exorbitant joining fees and are given permission to provide services without holding the required operating licenses and permits. The constant recruitment of members in excess of passenger demand by these mother bodies result in destructive competition for passengers and ultimately violence. Until there are consequences, Deputy Speaker, for these criminal actions, the violence will continue. My department and I, supported by Minister Fritz and the Department of Community Safety, are working closely with the South African Police Services and a dedicated team of investigators to ensure successful convictions in taxi-related murders and attempted cases. The National Prosecuting Authority has also developed a single repository for taxi-related crimes. We cannot remedy these criminal actions, Deputy Speaker, through regulatory interventions alone. We are in the process of approaching the Western Cape High Court to get a declaratory order on the constitution of the South African National Taxi Council because the Santaka National Council Constitution only makes provision for taxi regions that must be confined to a particular geographical area. The Constitution of the Western Cape branch of Santaka, however, Deputy Speaker, makes provision for both mother bodies and regions, and we have requested the court to rule on whether the provincial constitution is in conflict with the national document. But Deputy Speaker, the taxi violence in the Ceres area can also be attributed to the infiltration of the area by these two mother bodies. Prior to 2016, there were only two registered taxi associations operating in the Ceres area, namely Ceres Nduli Taxi Association and Ceres and District Taxi Association. The violence started in 2016 when an illegal taxi grouping affiliated to CATA started operating in the area. Deputy Speaker, some members of SETA also defected and joined the CATA grouping. They used violence and intimidation to monopolize the certain taxi routes. This prompted Ceres Nduli Taxi Association to affiliate to CODETA mother body. The name of this association, Deputy Speaker, was later changed to CODETA Witzenberg Taxi Association. The presence of both mother bodies in the area resulted in the escalation in taxi violence. They continued to fight over rights to trade on certain local and long-distance roads. A case in point is the new housing development in Vredebes. The transportation of seasonal farm workers has also resulted in tension between the two groups. Deputy Speaker, in 2019, 4 taxi operators were murdered in Ceres. This was followed by a further 6 murders in 2020 and 7 in 2021. To date, 17 taxi-related murders have been reported in the Ceres area and 9 attempted murders. Deputy Speaker, the ongoing violence cannot be attributed to regulatory failures alone. As mentioned, these are criminal actions. Notwithstanding this, Deputy Speaker, there have been several regulatory interventions. The provincial regulatory entity has confirmed that there are no backlogs with regards to operating license applications for the serious area. In 2017, Deputy Speaker, both the PRI and the Office of the Provincial Taxi Registrar instituted remedial action against SETA members who joined the illegal Carter grouping. These members were ordered to rejoin SETA and to remove the Carter stickers from their vehicles. While some of these members complied with the pre-order, others continued to operate under the auspices of Carter, who had no locus standi in the area. The operating licenses of the defecting members were cancelled by the PRI in August 2017. Deputy Speaker, there was also an attempt to register the illegal Carter grouping in 2018. This application for registration was not supported by the local authority, and the application was declined by the Office of the Provincial Taxi Registrar in April 2018. The illegal grouping continues to show disregard for the law and is still providing minibus taxi service in the Ceres area without the required operating licenses. In March 2021, the illegal grouping wrote to the Ministry of Transport and Public Works complaining about the ongoing law enforcement operations in the area and the fact that they have not granted operating licenses. Deputy Speaker, I want to make it clear that we will not allow any association or mother body to bully government into submission. We have to understand that transport planning is an exclusive local government matter and falls outside the purview of my department. In terms of Section 36 of the National Land Transport Act, each municipality, Deputy Speaker, must prepare an integrated transport plan for its area to respond to the changes in the demand and supply of public transport services. The Transport Needs Assessment chapter of the ITP must include present and future demand estimations. The Public Transport chapter must outline a policy and strategy for the role of each public transport mode. This must guide the disposal of operating licenses. In respect of non-contracted regulators, daily service in the area, it should describe the defined public transport routes or specified groups of routes on which non-contracted services may operate, and the number of vehicles that planning authority will authorize. The municipality must further provide, Deputy Speaker, directions to the provincial regulatory entity on operating license applications. Where there's a need for this service, the municipality must direct the PRI to grant the application. However, where the public transport requirements on the route or in the area concerned are already adequately serviced by another public transport service of a similar nature, standard or quality, the municipality must direct the PRI to refuse the application. The PRI must not grant an operating license contrary to the direction of the municipality or the ITP for the area. Deputy Speaker, we continue to support the Witzenberg municipality to deal with the ongoing violence. We have also provided operating licenses and registration information to law enforcement agencies and have assisted with the interpretation of operating licenses, license authorities and conditions. Provincial Traffic, Deputy Speaker, has also actively supported municipal traffic with joint enforcement operations. In addition, the South African Police Service must deal with the criminal action of these mother bodies. My department continues to work closely with SAPS, and we are pleased to report that 18 arrests have been made in Ceres in respect of taxi-related crimes, of which 8 cases are currently on the court roll. We have attended several meetings with SAPS and the Witzenberg municipality to develop interceding measures. In addition, there have been several engagements with SETA and Ceres Nduli Taxi Association to caution them not to take the law into their own hands and to preclude misconduct on the part of their members. Deputy Speaker, we will soon be approaching the High Court to interdict Carter from providing minibus taxi services in the Greater Ceres area without holding the required operating licenses or permits. If the safety of our passengers using these services deteriorates to an unacceptable level, I will have no option, Deputy Speaker, but to invoke my powers in terms of Section 91 of the National Land Transport Act to declare the area as high risk in respect of taxi violence and to close certain taxi ranks and routes. I will also suspend effective operating licenses. This, however, Deputy Speaker, will be a last resort. My department has supported previous Santaco-led interventions to resolve the conflict between Kata and Kodeta mother bodies, and another peace intervention was scheduled for this week. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Honourable Vimbi, this is your question. Do you want the first bite?
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Speaker. And also thank you very much to the Minister for such an elaborate and a very extensive response. In a way, it has been very helpful in some of the questions I was going to ask. But also part of the reason that really encouraged me to ask this question was also I know the Minister, when he was still, even during by the time he was the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Transport and Public Work, he's been very proactive whenever there has been some violence in the public transport sector. I remember when there were fires and when there were buses that were banned of golden arrows, he was always very quick to call a meeting of a standing committee and see how we can actually engage and resolve the matter. But I just wanted to check on this particular issue. In spite of the elaborate response that he has given, has there been any engagement with the mentioned association? Because most of as he has mentioned, that most of the fights are actually among the taxi association. Has there been a meeting that has been convened by the minister or the department between Kata and Kodeta?
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, let me go back to and I want to use the Nyanga incident. On the 3rd of June, I met with the taxi leadership, so yes, to answer Honourable Mvimbi, that was the case. My department, as I indicated in my first response, has continued the engagement with the taxi industry, and as such, there has been a session that took place for over 2 days this current week with a identified mediator between the two associations that was arranged by the department. So to answer Honourable Mvimbi, yes, that indeed happened, and I will continue to engage the taxi industry in the interest of commuters of this province. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Minister, thank you. Honourable Mackenzie?
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the Minister actually gave a bit of a history into some of these conflicts, and it also helped me in understanding some of my questions. And I know that Honourable Member Mvimbi asked specifically about the two associations, and I'm just going to ask for all associations and for all the captains of industry in the taxi industry in the Western Cape. Has the Minister started to engage with all of them?
Minister?
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, as I indicated, we, at the Department of Transport and Public Works, we engage all stakeholders. We continuously engage all stakeholders. And as I indicated previously, it remains my commitment to ensure that in order to ensure safe, reliable public transport service in this province, I will continue to engage stakeholders that contribute to ensure that that service is being provided to the citizens of this province. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Honourable Moran?
Speaker, thank you. Can I ask my question?
Yes, you may. Go ahead.
Thanks, Speaker, to the Honourable Mitchell in relation to the Witzenberg taxi violence, saying he will use his powers to close taxi ranks. There's two taxi ranks, that's a piece of land that belongs to a private owner, and then there's one behind ShopRite. It's just parking, not a taxi rank. How will you close those areas, which are not taxi ranks, where these guys are operating from? Thanks.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the reality is, if it's a taxi rank, and as per the powers vested in me, I will enforce those powers if it affects the safety of communities. However, what the Honourable Maran is referring to is a law enforcement requirement. Now, there's this fundamental difference between an enforcement from a regulatory perspective and a criminal enforcement that is the mandate of the South African Police Services. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further follow-up hands. That concludes question 2. Thank you, Minister. We now move over to question 3. I recognize the Honourable Minister Fernandes.
Good afternoon, Honourable Deputy Speaker. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
You are, Minister. You may proceed.
Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Premier, Cabinet Ministers, members in the House. My question is from the Honourable Baku Fos, and I wish to thank her for the question, which is a very pertinent question. It has 2 parts to the question. So I will address part A by saying that gender-based violence is a long-term societal challenge. In acknowledging the scale of the challenge, the Western Cape government's operational and analytical work has expanded considerably in recent years. We are in the process of finalizing the province's first ever GBV transversal implementation plan to help address the scourge of violence against women and children in this province. Honourable Deputy Speaker, anyone who has suffered physical, mental, emotional harm, including economic loss or substantial impairment of their fundamental rights through crime and violence fits into this grouping. So the Department of Social Development's Victim Empowerment Program, supported by funded NGOs in the Western Cape, offers a variety of services which include, amongst others, emotional and practical support, management of trauma, identification of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, referrals to professional services where necessary, provisions of court support services during the criminal justice process, promoting the rights and responsibilities of clients through advocacy, ensuring that clients are aware of their rights, and preventing ongoing victimization and provision of a shelter service. A shelter is a safe place where victims of crime and violence are able to live for a period anything from 1 day to approximately 3 to 4 months, depending on the needs of the victim. Shelters assist with meeting basic needs such as providing a safe place to live, providing protection, food and clothing, providing emotional support services such as trauma debriefing and therapeutic counseling, providing information on developing skills, victims' rights and capacity building, support in preparation for court procedures, and programs focused on alleged perpetrators and gender-based violence prevention programs. Honourable Deputy Speaker, in the 2020-21 financial year, the Department of Social Development appointed 30 social workers that focus on GBV interventions. Social workers were appointed in high-risk areas identified by the Western Cape Government Safety Plan and GBV hotspots as identified by the Presidency. For example, Khayelitsha, Philippi, Gugulethu, Delft, Mitchells Plain, and Atlantis. Furthermore, the Victim Empowerment Program has appointed NPO service providers to render social work services in Harare, Mufuleni, Alsesova, Hanover Park, Blukenbos, and Nyanga. Just this morning, Honourable Deputy Speaker, I attended the Victim Empowerment Forum, which is a quarterly forum, and at that forum, Colonel Paulser from SAPS presented the SAPS gender-based violence strategy to address GBV in the province, and we had all stakeholders in the room, including the NPA, the Department of Health, the Department of Justice. So we are working around the clock because SAPS have also identified the 8 GBV hotspots in this area, which are mirrored in the 11 hotspots identified in the safety plan. The part B of the question, Honourable Deputy Speaker, is that shelters funded by the Department of Social Development's victim empowerment program admit women and children that need safe accommodation from all areas and not only from a specific area. And this is in an effort to ensure the safety of the victim or survivor, because it is often not safe to be accommodated in the same area that the incident, the GBV incident, actually occurred. In the Cape Town Metropole, we currently fund 12 shelters. And if it is a high-risk case that is identified, then the victim and the children can also be moved to one of the 13 rural shelters to ensure their safety. In closing on this question, Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to announce that the 6 properties that were handed to us by National Public Works, 4 shelters are all functional and operational. So we have the additional 6 or 5 spaces in the rural areas to make provision for women in rural areas who were deprived of an opportunity to have a safe space for them when they succumbed or became a victim to the scourge of gender-based violence in this province. I thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Honourable Bakabaka Force, do you want to do a follow-up?
Yes, Deputy Speaker, if I may.
Over to you.
Oh, thank you, Minister. I would like to ask if what measures are available in the department to prevent GBV and femicide, not only to react to these cases, and what are the plans of the department to support the shelters that are already in these communities that are not funded by the department? Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Bakabaka Foss, for the question. We do have service providers operating in these areas who provide support to the teams, our regional officers, and in this case we have Metro South, Metro North, we have the West Coast region, the Garden Route, Eden Karoo, I'm missing 1 or 2, Central. So our DSD officers provide support as and when, but that, as you say, is often when a case is reported and they are expected to go to a scene. However, there are many NPOs operating in these spaces that we fund who provide the necessary awareness. And I also know that the city is running an extensive campaign in this regard. When it comes to funding, Honourable Bakabaka Foss, there is a formal process for registered NPOs. We do have an NPO desk that will assist them with their application. And I can also say that recently the Premier and I met with the National Commission, who are to invest in projects regarding gender-based violence in this province. So there are but if there are any shelters that you are aware of that might require funding, we could certainly assist them with the process to get registered, and if they are registered, to be able to apply for funding. However, as you may know, I believe last week our Chief Director, Charles Jordan, briefed the committee on the NPO funding process. It is a process, and unfortunately, it has a cutoff date and it operates in cycles. I trust that I've answered your question sufficiently. Thank you, Honourable Bakabaka Foss.
Thanks, Honourable Minister. I recognise Honourable Bosman.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, through you to the Minister. Minister, we've got an entire National Department of Women, Children and People with Disabilities. Are you able to perhaps tell us if there are any collaborations or support in the form of substantive funding that comes from this department to enhance the preventative work that's being done by the victim empowerment services in the provincial DSD?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Bosman, it's a difficult question to answer because the Department of Women, Children, Persons with Disability normally liaise with the priority unit in the Department of the Premier, but I must, for the record, state that the working relationship between National DSD and the National Department is not at the level that it should be. As you may know, the draft GBV proposal, or the 6 pillars, the summit, the President announced, and the CGE at a sitting which I attended on behalf of the Premier to the National Assembly, the CGE has found some damning gaps and flaws in the process, which talks to a level of non-engagement. Consultation is not adequate, and it is concerning that many might know that there were 6 vehicles allocated by the German government for GBV, and it is sad that none of those vehicles found their way to the Western Cape, despite us having 8 of the GBV hotspots in the country, in this province. However, I will continue to reach out, and we have, as I said, engaged the National Department. We've engaged through the different forums with the National Department of Women and Children, but there is very little coming from that department at this point in time, and I am not aware of any funding. I would need to go and check with the necessary program office, and if there is indeed funding, I will provide that response to the House. Thank you, Honourable Bosman.
Thank you, Minister. Any further follow-up questions?
Yes, Honourable Deputy Speaker.
Back to you, Honourable Bosman.
Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful that the Minister was able to confirm that no substantial support comes from this national department. I'd like to ask the Minister if she could tell us when last the National Minister of Social Development conducted a MINMEC meeting to discuss some of these issues. I understand Minister Zulu is busy looking for the President's iPad, but has she been able to find funding for GBV victims?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Bosman, I can't account for the President's iPad, and I must admit that our MINMECs aren't held frequently. We have not had, well, we had one, I think, last month, but they are not, as the other departments would have, regular monthly meetings, so I can't talk to the issue of GBV. I can say that the Deputy Minister was in the province on the 21st of May, and she conducted a men's parliamentary session, I believe, out in, it could be Masipumaleli, and she also indicated at a public event at one of our shelters that she had invested 600,000 of her own money. So I will be posing questions in that regard, because I know there was a contractor on site, but we appreciate all the support that we can get. The initial letter I got regarding the GBV support was that Public Works would assist. However, I don't think that our local Public Works or Provincial Public Works have been engaged on the matter. So I will be doing a follow-up regarding the support that one of our safe houses has received. Thank you, Honourable Bosman.
Thank you, Minister. Honourable Nkondlo. Honourable Nkondlo, can you hear me? I see your hand is up.
Yes, Deputy Speaker, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to ask the Minister, if we go back to Khayelitsha, whether the kind of intervention that she has mentioned of the support, counselling, and all the others, the victim empowerment support, what kind of evaluation mechanism does the department has to sort of evaluate impact of these interventions of the department, and whether such at this point have given any indication of any progress to the type of investment that is being done in that regard? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Nkondlo, thank you for the question. As I said in my opening response, the scale of the challenge is huge. I would be the first to admit that we are certainly not doing enough in terms of in terms of Khayelitsha, but I do want to alert the member that we do have an M&E team. I would like to believe that when we do funding to NPOs, we actually measure the impact of our programs on the ground, and that is certainly something we need to work towards. I had the privilege of doing a keynote speech at 12:30 today with the 1000 Women Trust, of which Wendy Ackerman is a patron. And I want to talk to a specific intervention last year in Khayelitsha, which was born out of Khayelitsha. And it started with women, it started in COVID. These were women who were affected by COVID early in April and May. And they then suffered post-traumatic, or they had psychosocial support that they required. And I had met with them in a webinar on a Saturday afternoon. But what emerged from that webinar was the fact that many of the women were also victims of gender-based violence. I then partnered, DSD partnered together with the 1000 Women Trust, and they set up WhatsApp groups that had 15 women per group with a registered counselor providing trauma support via WhatsApp, and this was during the hard lockdown of level 4 and 5. We started off with one WhatsApp group of 15 women, of which I was one, because I wanted to experience this firsthand, and that has grown significantly. And what then happened, the psychosocial support module ended, and they then engaged on a gender-based violence education and training module. And here the women were able to provide feedback and input to their lived experience. And that program reached over 5,000 people in the last year, Honorable Deputy Speaker. And in my discussion with the 1,000 women just this morning, they have indicated that they will continue with that program. So that is one of the interventions where we collaborate with partners, where it is not necessarily DSD. And I do know that a lot of our key NPOs and also the women's shelter movement that is very actively and whom we collaborate with closely, they keep very strict records, and they also document and measure and assess the impact of the work that they do in a particular area. But there is certainly a lot more to be done. However, gender-based violence cannot be viewed through a single lens. There are societal issues and there are drivers to GBV, of which drugs and alcohol are one of the key drivers. So it will require a whole of government approach and a whole of society approach to address the scourge of gender-based violence, not only in our province and in our country, but globally. I thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. That brings us to the end of question 3. Minister, I know we're moving over to you again for question 4. I recognise Minister Fernandez.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and to the Honourable Christians, thank you for the question. The question is regarding the dangers of consuming alcohol during pregnancy, and I will respond as follows to the Honourable Christians. The Department of Social Development, DSD, funds the following organisations to educate communities, and these are the 3 that we fund, Honourable Christians, but there are many other NPOs also doing work. The one is the Foundation for Alcohol-Related Research, known as FAR, and they conduct research and implement community-based awareness and prevention interventions at local clinics. They also present the training course, FASTRAP, to train community members, to train others with accurate information related to fetal alcohol syndrome. And as part of their harm reduction intervention, the organization also offers workshops aimed at reducing high-risk drinking behavior. The second NPO is early years services. They are funded to equip early childhood development practitioners with skills to provide appropriate intervention and support when dealing with children affected by FAST. Then the third provider is FAST. They render services specifically to pregnant women to increase awareness of the risks related to using alcohol whilst pregnant. This organization is also subsidized with a social worker position to render therapeutic early intervention services to pregnant females in their areas of operation. The Department, Honourable Christian, through the Chair, also provides services through its local offices and has communication campaigns on alcohol and other substance abuse related harms with the aim of increasing the span of available services by training community members to provide the necessary support and assistance with referral to appropriate intervention services where such services are required, increased targeted awareness with youth and young adults in farming communities located in areas where there is a high prevalence of fetal alcohol syndrome, also spreading information on social media, positive messaging, utilizing the existing Western Cape government portals and the various referral links. We include men and fathers in interventions with the aim to include them to play their part in combating FAST and also increasing awareness of gender-based violence with a key focus on alcohol-related harms and their linkages with gender-based violence, as I alluded to in my previous response. Honourable Deputy Speaker, for a variety of reasons, unplanned pregnancies, limited resources, attitudinal challenges, and a lack of knowledge, women often make use of antenatal services very late during their pregnancies and therefore further delay the possibility of getting information about the dangers of substance abuse and alcohol abuse and the necessary FAS support. There are still many myths and untrue stories being told around FAST, and some people still believe that a woman must be an alcoholic to have a child with fetal alcohol syndrome. The prevention message that must be spread is that no amount of alcohol is safe during pregnancy. FAST causes permanent damage, but it is preventable if you do not drink during pregnancy. The Provincial Department of Social Development, with the support of its NPO partners, provide a wide array of SUD, that's substance use disorder, programs, ranging from prevention, early intervention, through to community-based and inpatient rehabilitation and aftercare services. For the current financial year, 102 million has been budgeted for substance abuse programs and services. During the 2019-2020 financial year, 11,155 individuals accessed the substance abuse prevention and treatment service offered by the department and its partners. So I would like to recommend and suggest to the House that if you know someone you care about who has a substance use disorder, if you feel that you can't cope with the symptoms of substance abuse in your home or place of work, we all acknowledge that getting help is the first step. The treatment of SUD is a process, Deputy Speaker, and ongoing support has to be provided before and throughout the program. So before starting treatment, the service pro user, in this case, a mother, a pregnant mother, will attend an assessment session. The completed assessment will determine the type of treatment that is required and is conducted by a trained healthcare professional or social worker. The assessments are completed at a local office or at any community-based organization that provides the necessary services. The Department, Honourable Christians, remains committed to continuously working to expand the reach and quality of its substance abuse treatment, and not only in terms of fetal alcohol, in terms of FAS, but in any SUD and substance abuse intervention. I thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Honourable Christians, do you want to do a follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Speaker. Thank you to the Minister for that comprehensive answer and for all the interventions. The question to the Minister is, are we winning the fight with all these interventions, and is there a decline in the statistics? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Christians, for the question. I think if we want to win the fight, we need to reset our moral compass as a country, in my opinion. I believe that alcohol abuse or even substance abuse is a societal issue, and it sadly cannot be addressed or dealt with and responded to by a single government department. We would need to collaborate, and I believe in the approach which this government has adopted in its recovery plan, where we look at a life cycle approach starting from the cradle to the grave. So the first 1,000 days, that is dealt with by the Department of Health, and that's a critical intervention. We then look at the role that Minister Schaefer plays in terms of education. We also look at the role of the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture in creating the awareness with vulnerable youth in certain areas. And we also look at the role that DOCS and other departments have to play. So in terms of our recovery plan, the government has, our cabinet has approved 3 components. The one is safety, which is mostly spoken about in Parliament. The other one is that of jobs, and the third area is that of well-being. And gender-based violence and the issue of abuse, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, is a component of that work stream, which I chair together with convene with 4 other ministers. And one of the things we can do is to encourage our local municipalities to establish local drug action committees, otherwise known as ALDACs. But we also have, in this well-being work stream, we have established a faith-based subcommittee, and that is chaired by Minister Mayor. And once a month, the FPOs get together, and we have now gained the support of the faith-based organizations who support us not only with psychosocial support during this COVID period of the last 400 and odd days. They have assisted us with food aid and food relief. They have also assisted us with the vaccination drive when they came out as ambassadors when Bishop Tutu got vaccinated. And similarly, they help us with societal issues in communities when it is difficult, it is after hours, and social workers cannot intervene at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. It is normally our faith-based community, faith-based organizations and community activists that support us. So in short, Honourable Christians, it is definitely a whole of society approach. We do need to engage a lot more with communities in a positive and engaging manner so that they can take responsibility for what happens in, not firstly in communities, but in their homes. I believe that it has to start at home. And for me, as a parent of someone who has been through a difficult experience, you do require the support of your family, your colleagues, and your community. So I would like to say that it requires a whole of government approach, and we have now adopted that transversal approach to dealing with issues of safety and gender-based violence, but it also requires a whole of society approach. And I would want to encourage every member in this House to assist us in driving that positive messaging regarding the use of alcohol and drugs. And as I said, having been affected by it, I know how difficult it is for many desperate families who don't see a way out of this. They abandon their children, their partners, their spouses, their family members, and it becomes a vicious cycle that gets perpetuated over time. I thank the Honourable Christians for the question.
Thank you, Minister. I don't see any further follow-up questions. No. We move then over to question 5. I now recognise the Honourable Minister Simmers.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. It is a requirement of all project approvals that the successful bidder utilises local labour. It is standard practice that all projects must be registered with the relevant municipality. This registration, together with the EPWP profile ID, grants the contractor access to the municipal job seekers database. The database is searchable for specific wards and the appropriate skills, which is then drawn first from what is available in the immediate locality. Should the required skills not be available in a specific locality, the contractor may only then search incrementally wider in the municipal area. Each contract provides for the appointment of a community liaison officer, or CLO as we commonly know it, Honourable Christians, drawn from the local community, whose duty includes sourcing local labour and facilitating communication between the beneficiary community and the contractor. Labour and training created on all public infrastructure delivery projects are reported to the National Department of Public Works and Infrastructure via the EPWP reporting system. It should be noted that during the 2020-2021 financial year, given that information is being audited, preliminary data indicate that my department facilitated 937 working opportunities with the implementation of 34 housing delivery projects on which the department acts as developer. I can confirm, however, that during the 2019-2020 financial year, 1,056 work opportunities were created against a target of 800. Furthermore, my department places an obligation on municipalities through its funding agreements to report the work opportunities created on human settlement development projects implemented at municipal level on the EPWP reporting system for the purposes of completing the employment creation picture insofar as the human settlements development grant expenditure is concerned. Thank you, Member.
Thank you, Minister. I now ask Honourable Christians, do you want to do follow-up?
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Yes. Deputy Speaker, I just want to know, somebody sent me a photo. I think it's the Greater Blue Downs area. It's 8,000 houses that's been built. I've written a letter to the minister about this, and they were protesting out there to say that people as far from Mossel Bay was employed in the area, and they with skills and whatever they are were not considered. So when the question to the minister is, when these contractors don't adhere to what they're supposed to do, what is the action that aggrieved communities or contractors staying in the area, artisans, what is the action they can take in order to report this matter? Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Member Christians. Firstly, Member Christians, on the question of localized labour, and you're using the example of the Blue Downs project as an example, one needs to understand that the local residents who wish to benefit from, in this case, the Blue Downs project, they ultimately need to ensure that they are registered on the City of Cape Town's database, as I've indicated, to which the contractor will then gain access, and ultimately will first source from that pool. Whenever there's a skill set not covered by that specific database, in this case for the Blue Downs area, then the contractor ultimately, or the main contractor, will then seek to obviously incrementally spread his search much wider. But one also needs to understand each phase of a specific project has a specific skill set, and that also plays a huge role. Similar to your secondary question regarding to the issue of local contractors, the same result, where there's individuals seeking to be employed at a specific project. Secondly, where the subcontractors, they also need to ensure that they are registered on the local municipalities database, in this case, the City of Cape Town, or in our case, which we did early last year, we also opened up our own database and actually encouraged SMMEs who wish to do business with my department to enroll on that specific program, because ultimately, when we do sign or go into a contract with the main contractor, within that contractor's stipulation is that he must ensure an X number of localized labor, the X number of SMMEs, and to a fair portion also assist with expanding the capacity of the SMMEs. One such an example, Honourable Member, is our Mountain View project in Mossel Bay, where the contractor went above and beyond that which is stipulated in his contract, but also ensuring that he develops a further number of subcontractors, which ultimately they will now be migrating from their current level to a higher level, and hopefully, they will ultimately, in due course, in the future, get business from my department as well. So it's all dependent on the first port of call is to gain access and register yourself for an opportunity, Honourable Christians. Whether you're an individual or whether you are an up-and-coming or, soos maar nou in platte Afrikaansie, of jy nou 'n bakkie kontrakteer is. Die beginsel is, jy registreer op die databasis. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I don't see any further follow-up questions. No. That brings us to the end of questions for oral reply. Our time is up. Outstanding replies will be printed in Hansard. Thank you, members. We now move over to statements by members in terms of Rule 145. I recognize the DA.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. On Tuesday, the PRASA board appeared before the Standing Committee on Transport and Public Works to present his plan on the turnaround strategy for train operations in the province. They say a first impression is a lasting one. Deputy Speaker, 5 of the PRASA executives are in acting positions. This immediately tells us that very little is being turned around to the entity, as this problem has plagued them for years. Let's contrast that with the Western Cape, where officials have job security and the government departments enjoy full reliability from its employees. Nevertheless, a key admission from PRASA's Group CEO was that intelligence revealed at the National Joint Operational and Intelligence Structure does not filter down to boots on the ground. This is a significant reason as to why arson and vandalism continue to decimate our railways. Deputy Speaker, what is the point of speaking about a problem at a meeting and not sharing information with colleagues who can protect residents and our infrastructure? In the words of Dr. Meyer, eat, meet, and greet. I'll be taking this matter further with our colleagues at the National Assembly Intelligence Committee. We need to know to the extent of the issue and how it's being addressed. Deputy Speaker, the reality on the ground is that our train operations have decreased by 66%. As of now, we only have 29 functional train sets in comparison to more than 80 back in 2014. The central line is still not fully operational, and there are presently 7,844 dwellings blocking trains from running. It will cost at least 2.8 billion to restore the central line. Again, government will have to use taxpayers' hard-earned money to finance this. This is despite our national president announcing last year that the train will be up and running by now. Meanwhile, because of national failures, our residents must again rely on more expensive and less environmentally friendly means of transport. This means more congestion on our roads and longer queues amid the winter and a terrible pandemic. We can no longer be spectators to this destruction. It is time for rail to be devolved to capable, financially sustainable subnational government, which is the DA in the Western Cape. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And now I recognise the ANC.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. The ANC notes that while the Honourable Premier persists in his pursuit of pushing for a parallel vaccine program, now suggesting that discussions are ongoing to acquire the Sinopharm, Sinovac, Sputnik vaccines, Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, the approved vaccines in South Africa. The South African authorizing body have clearly indicated in the public domain that they will only be dealing with national government and not working with this provincial government. For all the fanfare this provincial government has made about itself, international corporations are simply not interested in doing business with this provincial government. That's simply not how it works. The ANC therefore calls on the Premier to save face and admit the foolishness of his administration while urgently redirecting those funds, 800 million rands, back to those frontline departments which they had misdirected the funds from in the first place. On the 27th of May, the Premier announced that 2 weeks from then, the province would be vaccinating 24,000 people per day. Well, nearly a month later, Deputy Speaker, we only, in this province, vaccinated 10,000 people. We note the calls to lower the age brackets for vaccinations, but remain deeply concerned that the majority of people over the age of 60 in this province have not been vaccinated. Only 53% of 60-year-olds in the province have registered to be vaccinated, let alone actually be vaccinated. And the national statistics are now showing that Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, and the Eastern Cape and Limpopo, 4 provinces, are daily vaccinating more people over 60 than the Western Cape is doing. That was figures from yesterday. More than half of the elderly in Mitchells Plain, Athlone, Khayelitsha, Parow, Kraaifontein, Matroosfontein, and Langa have not been registered. Only 8% of the elderly in Philippi have been registered. 40%
your time is up.
In Delft and 19% in Umfuleni. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I now recognise the EFF. No, EFF, sorry, apologies. I recognise the DA.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. We welcome the public-private partnership between Discovery, the Western Cape Government, and the City of Cape Town to ramp up the vaccination drive by launching the Mass Vaccination Centre of Hope at the CTICC. But our greatest concern remains the slow, inconsistent supply of vaccines to the province. While this province is meeting and often beating its weekly vaccination targets, our capacity is far greater than the supply of jabs. Although we note the increase in Pfizer supply, as mentioned by the Premier earlier today, this will have to accommodate those who are ready for their second jab. Our systems are thus ready in the Western Cape to ramp up the drive, but the slow process in the supply and the hiccups in the registration system continue to leave us short. Deputy Speaker, at the same time, I'm taken aback by the Premier of Gauteng's announcement that vaccine rollout for 50 to 59-year-olds will start next week. It is shocking that another province is making an announcement on a national mandate. And what's worrying is that it leaves us asking whether there is preferential treatment for ANC-led provinces or the announcement is on the President's iPad, Deputy Speaker. The ANC has shown no credible leadership on the vaccination process. Their announcements and action has been 1, out of touch with reality, 2, inconsistent, and 3, so slow and disappointing. That is evident in this announcement once again. Our call remains twofold: to firstly maintain a steady increase in supply, and secondly for the registration system to be open ahead of time for the next phase of the rollout. This should address any challenges down the line, not to mention the lack of consistency from national government. Deputy Speaker, it is important that we maintain a flow in the vaccination drive as the country is reaching the height of the third wave. In other parts of our country, more cases are recorded than in the previous waves of COVID-19. Deputy Speaker, in the province to which an efficient vaccination drive plays a key role. I thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Member. I now recognise Good.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the Provincial Department of Education recently conducted a COVID-19 survey to assess the impact of the pandemic on teaching, learning, and parenting during the full lockdown and the phased reopening of the education sector. The survey, which was digitally driven, was to be accessed through online forms and an active internet connection. Unsurprisingly, the research found an alarming divide exists between learners, particularly those in quintile 1 to 3 and the no-fee schools. This outcome cements the common perception that this government has done little to give access to the digital culture that is speedily becoming the norm. The results give us a window view into the stark reality of most parents and students who could not participate in the survey due to not being able to access digital resources. Out of the 926,000 prospective participants, only 18,300 could actively engage the study. Those who could not participate are also those who are sidelined from the prospects of finding employment opportunities, who would have the required skill sets to participate in the digital economy. This province has exposed itself as unable to provide tangible solutions to digital education and to ensure all learners are well equipped for the digital economy and provide the provisions afforded to every South African child under the Constitution, which is basic education. Deputy Speaker, the problem of the poor majority's inability to access digital solutions is the problem that developmental resources of this province are being used to maintain the status quo 27 years into democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And now recognise the ACDP.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, children with fetal alcohol syndrome disorder attend special needs schools. When they are young FASD sufferers, they need much attention, which they do not get from the mainstream schools. Unfortunately, there are not enough special needs schools to cope with the FASD learners. In South Africa, there is a high number of dropout rate amongst FASD learners. They simply cannot cope in the mainstream schools. The trouble starts when they drop out, that they then get involved in crime. So FAST does not disappear when you turn 18 years old, but continues into adulthood. And what does this mean, Deputy Speaker? It continues into adulthood. This means that they are adults living with FASD. There is a good story. Home of Hope is an organization that runs special needs schools called Amatemba. They attend to these sufferers and will often, they say that these sufferers will often be caught up in crime.
Honourable Christians, I've lost you.
Deputy Speaker, do I still have time?
There, you're back. You're back. You've still got 15 seconds.
Okay. Home of Hope is a good story, as an organization that runs special needs schools. That's called Amatemba. But they also tell us that sufferers will often be caught up in crime because the lack of impulse control, also having difficulty linking their current activity with future consequences. And they are also socially immature. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honourable Christians. I recognise the ANC.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The African National Congress believes that schools must nurture future generations towards nation building and non-racialism. Sadly, in the Western Cape, the opposite is happening. The DA-led administration allows former Model C schools and private schools to be spaces of discrimination against Black learners, educators, and workers by covering up racist incidents. I'm not surprised, therefore, that last week MEC Schaefer and her colleagues in the DA opposed my motion on the German school and the racism. This week, we have been made aware of an alleged racist incident at the Bellville Technical High School, which is now being covered up allegedly by the principal and the WCD circuit manager. A teacher is alleged to have used racist terminology when addressing a Black worker in front of learners. In Worcester, HTS Drotsty, you have a situation where 5 learners were found with dacha on them. They were disciplined, but harsher sentences given to the 3 colored learners and the so-called white learners given lesser sentences. These cover-ups extend to white principals at former Model C schools who are implicated in corruption allegations. The Education MEC refuses to release the forensic investigation report into financial challenges at Golden Grove Primary School in Rondebosch, which found a series of irregularities and conflicts of interest involving the principal. This white principal faces 17 counts of corruption, and after a tender was irregularly awarded of over 1 million rand for a server without a proper tender process and meeting minutes. The MEC owes the parents of the school an explanation on how the principal was allowed to retire and then work at another school in the province. She must tell us how the embezzled funds will be recuperated. Similar cover-ups happened at Pinelands High School and Grove Primary. This is in stark contrast to the draconian manner in which the MEC and the department have dealt with black principals. Mr. Wesley Newman at Heathfield High School, Mr. Brian Isaacs at South Peninsula. We trust that the Western Cape public in various municipalities will see through the DA's naked promotion of white privilege on steroids when going to the polls in October next year. I thank you.
More than 30 seconds, please. I know you have taken full advantage of this today's sitting, but I please ask you to heed the rules. I ask now for the DA.
Where's my iPad? Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. The Auditor General's presentation to SCOPA in the National Assembly on Tuesday reported that 22 municipalities across the country had failed to submit financial statements. They largely account for the missing 5.5 billion rand in the 2019-2020 financial year. One of them happens to be Beaufort West. We need not to inquire as to which party runs that administration. This is contrasted by the fact that according to Ratings Africa, the top 5 best-run municipalities in the province are led by the DA. Deputy Speaker, we all know that the ANC places self-interest ahead of the residents' well-being. To list just a few examples, an Eastern Cape municipality, the ANC mayor spent COVID relief funds on purchasing a car for himself. In Johannesburg, the executive is under investigation for politicking with food parcels during by-elections. And sadly, Kimberley will have no water as from today until Saturday. In the end, Deputy Speaker, we will never know the true extent of the damage caused by ANC corruption. Out of all the performance reports sent to the AG, 41% of the achievements reported were unreliable. 39% of the targets and performance indicators were not useful, and 5% of records planning documents couldn't be confirmed in the performance reports. None of them were from the DA-run municipalities. Despite that, over 1 billion rand spent on consultants, more than half of these services were rendered ineffective due to the lack of records and documentations. Deputy Speaker, under DA governance, there is hope. In the Western Cape, we set the benchmark for good governance by having 23 unqualified audits. The election this year provides South Africans a chance to elect governments that place residents' interests above ANC self-enrichment. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Maybe if you never asked about the iPad, you might have been able to finish the statement.
Sorry.
I recognise the Freedom Front Plus.
Speaker, thank you. The Freedom Front Plus wish to express our deep concern that land held in trust by the National Minister of Land Reform in terms of the Trankra Act may fall foul of and be expropriated under the new amendment to the Section 25 of our national constitution, and it will be handed over to party supporters. Elam, Genatendal, Banaisa, Zoar, Vaikraal, Wuppertal, Slangervie, Peniel, and 15 huge expansions of land totaling 1.2 million hectares should be excluded from expropriation, safe and accept to hand it over to the members of the colored communities who occupies it and for whom it is being held in trust by national government. The Freedom Front Plus are watching developments with a hawk's eye and will assist these communities if need be to hold on to these lands in terms of Section 235 of this country's constitution with reference to self-determination. Leave the Khoisan people and the Griquas people land alone. Take your hands off it. It belongs to them. It doesn't belong to any Nguni tribe because they are not indigenous to the Cape. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And now I recognise Al-Jamar.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the Western Cape government, together with the City of Cape Town, undertook to address the root causes of crime and violence with its traditional boots on the ground and other violence prevention interventions to halve the murder rate in the province. And the additional 500 boots on the ground law enforcement officers were deployed in February 2020. Many of these boots on the ground officers are visible in the CBD, where they are enjoying strolls in already safe areas. But when one wanders through the dangerous streets of Delft, Kailicha, Hanover Park, Philippi, and other crime-ridden areas, there are no signs of boots on the ground. Every day there are reported murders and serious crimes in these areas, but no visibility of the boots on the ground. Formal and informal businesses are up in arms with the growing crime rate in these areas. The people in Mitchell's Plain, Kailicha know very well that the DA has been in charge of this province for a very long time, and that the murder rate in the apartheid era townships have not decreased. Honourable Deputy Speaker, we do not hear the sounds of boots on the ground, neither see effective policing in areas most needed. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And now recognise the DA.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. We heard this year at the State Capture Inquiry that the State Security Agency, the SSA, funded projects to improve the political performance of the ANC in the Western Cape specifically. Deputy Speaker, is the ANC Western Cape still using state resources for its local government campaign? We can confirm that an ANC MPL was the sole participant in a community radio station interview paid for by the National Government Communication and Information Service, the GCIS. The role of the GCIS is to proactively communicate with the public about government policies, plans, programs, and achievements. For example, public messaging on COVID-19 safety. And in a parliamentary reply, the National Minister in the Presidency confirms that GCIS uses councillors, mayors, traditional leaders, government spokespersons, or subject matter specialists at local or district level. However, the ANC MPL on the show is not a government office bearer. No, he holds neither a cabinet position, nor is he an official spokesperson for any sphere of government. He's a member of the opposition and a shadow MEC, a politician. So why is the GCIS using taxpayers' money to pay for an ANC talk shop? Is it so that Member Syed could be given a platform to berate DA governments? We will be writing to the GCIS Western Cape Provincial Office for urgent clarification. We need to know how pervasive this is and if taxpayers' money is being spent for ANC politics.
Sorry, if you could just take your seat. I have a point of order. Honourable Syed, what is your point of order?
Chair, I think that the Chief Whip of the majority party ought to come with a substantive motion on the matter. She's casting aspersions on a member, but also is she willing to take a question on as to why the DA ward councillor didn't pitch up?
Don't ask your question
when he was part of the program.
Honourable Syed, I can't. This is first of all, there's no questions for statements. This is a statement. A statement, as you know, is a substantive motion. I will continue with her and allow her to finish her statement. Chief Whip, you may continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. We need to know how pervasive this practice is and whether taxpayers' money is being spent on broadcasting the ANC's political platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of statements in terms of Rule 145.6. I'll now give an opportunity of one or more members of the executive to respond to any of the members' statements for not more than 5 minutes. Are there any executives? I see Honourable Minister Schaefer.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. I just need to respond to the rant of Member Syed about our schools. I'm not sure what exactly his obsession is about former Model C and independent schools, and I'm not sure when he will actually understand that meaning of the word independent. Independent means they are not controlled by the Department of Education, other than to see that they are registered, and that is it. We do not control their disciplinary processes. We do not control their employment practices. And if there are issues of racism, obviously we do not approve of that, but there are other mechanisms that can be used to ensure that that happens. The German school, I understand that there was action taken against that teacher, and he could follow up with the school and the Independent Schools Association. But to keep on trying to give us more than our existing mandate can accommodate as it is just ridiculous. And I really don't know why he's so obsessed about former Model C schools that everybody wants to get in. We cannot accommodate all of our children in certain specific schools, and that is how it is. Now, as far as the other allegations of Belleville and Droste, I haven't heard about these allegations. I'm not sure why this has to be made available and made public in the House. The member has my contact details and he's welcome to send the information to me, and I will make sure that it is investigated. I haven't heard about it until now. I'm not sure why. As far as the
WhatsApp, we do oversight in the House.
Order, 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 Honourable Said.
As far as the Golden Grove report is concerned, yes, I am refusing to give it. The Provincial Forensic Investigation is a confidential process. It has been made in contemplation of litigation. Honourable Syed has already tried to get the information, but it complains about not taking action. How do you expect us to take legal action if we compromise the process by releasing a confidential document? Honourable Syed, if he wants to get into government, I suggest that he gets elected. As far as allowing people to retire, we do not control when people retire. There's a certain process that has to take place. And if people choose to retire, we are not like the ANC and want to control everybody's movements and everything they do. They have the freedom to retire if they wish. And if another school employs a person on an SGB post, which I assume must have happened, then they're entitled to do that. As far as Pinelands and Grove are concerned, it is completely untrue that nothing was done or hidden. There have been a number of questions that have been raised. All of them have been answered, and action was taken in both those cases. So Honourable Syed must stop trying to hide his blatant hatred of white people and incriminating him in everything that happens in this department. And quite frankly, it's just simply not true. So please stop beating the same old drum and come up with something different and something effective so that maybe you'll actually stand a chance of becoming a government in the Western Cape.
If you could just take your seat, Honourable Syed. What is your point of order?
On a point of order, Deputy Speaker, is it correct for the MEC to cast aspersions on a member, indicating that the member hates white people? Yeah. I'm standing here with somebody, a white person who's my leader. Cameron Dugmore is my leader who contributed to
Honourable Syed. You're very gentle. Have you lost your iPad?
Order, Honourable members.
You're out of order. You are out of
order.
That joke has become very stale, Honourable
members. Can I have some order in the House, please? On both sides, virtually and in the House. I will relook at Hansard and refer back to you whether the minister was directly accusing you or creating or casting aspersions. So I will refer in the next sitting. Honourable Minister, if you can proceed, please.
I've largely finished, Deputy Speaker, and I absolutely was casting aspersions, and I will happily defend that, because if you listen to the number of times he refers to white schools and white principals and white this and white that, it's quite clear.
What's wrong with you? You deny racism.
No.
You deny
Honourable Syed, in terms of Rule 40, we've been very clear on these hybrid sittings that there got to be no interjections. I would like the minister, and I'm certainly not going to start ruling on a he said, she said. So, Honourable Minister, can you finish your executive statement? Thank you. No further interjections on this matter, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I have largely finished. I just think, as I was saying about the Golden Grove matter, I mean, it's clear that Honourable Syed doesn't have respect for due process, and that is shown by his behaviour in the House today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any further executive statements? No, there aren't. Honourable Minister Mania, I see your hand.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I just want to put it on the record that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is quite wrong. Premier Alan Winde and the Western Cape government's decision to procure vaccines was exactly the right decision. And it's borne out by the fact that one of the biggest challenges in the vaccine rollout program is in fact constrained vaccine supply in the Western Cape. And indeed, if the Honourable Leader of the Opposition was able to find his own iPad, he would know that we budgeted 75 million, not 800 million, for the procurement of vaccines in the Western Cape. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. I now recognise Minister Fritz.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. I also just want to remind the Honourable...
Honourable Minister Fritz, 1 minute, just take a seat. Please stop the time. Honourable Dugmore, what is your point of order?
Just on a point of order, is the Leader of the Opposition finally then allowed to respond to the MECs who respond to the statements as the Leader of the Opposition?
In terms of Rule 145.6, members more than one can respond to any statement. That's correct, Honourable Dugmore.
That's an MEC. But
Correct.
now, as the Leader of the Opposition, am I allowed to respond to the MECs?
No.
Oh, sorry.
No, unfortunately not. Honourable Minister Fritz, you may respond.
Deputy Speaker, I also would like to remind the Honourable Brinkhuis that this is the province, the Western Cape province. We don't have a mandate to have a police force. In fact, we don't have a police force. We're doing this, everyone, the National Department, a favour to get extra boots on the ground, which the Honourable Brett Herron hates, because I don't know whether he don't believe in the people's safety in this province, but because we're so desperate to get our people safe, our voters safe, and everyone safe. And perhaps we must go on a workshop with Honourable Brinkhuis to please explain to him that our role is to support. We only give the funding so that the City of Cape Town and the South African Police services are supposed to protect the people. They're not protecting the people. The national ANC government is not protecting the people. And that's where the problem is. And that's why you can have Honourable Syed and the Leader of the Opposition sitting here and making jokes about everything. You know, they just point fingers instead of dealing with substantive issues to assist the people of this province. And I really want to remind and perhaps to invite him to come to standing committees, because you will learn a lot at the Community Safety Standing Committee. Really, we must urge the Honourable Brinkhuis to come to attend those standing committees. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Fritz. That brings us to the end of members' statements. We now move over to notices of motion in terms of Rule 151. And those motions were required to be delivered to the Secretary for placing it on the order paper. And those have been duly submitted and published on the order paper below the line. We will now move to motions without notice. I'd like to inform you that in terms of the new standing rule of 150, pertaining to the motions without notice, condolence and congratulatory were submitted to the Programming Authority prior to this plenary on the 22nd of June 2021. Members are reminded that those pertaining to congratulatory and condolence will not be allowed in this sitting, which have not been processed by the Programming Authority. I will therefore, just for noting and for the purpose of the minutes, call out the honourable members whose names have accordingly been submitted and approved of by the Programming Authority as follows. Honourable Philander, Honourable Christians, Honourable Philander, Honourable Kama, Honourable Philander, Honourable Brinkhuis, Honourable Allen, Honourable Kama, Honourable Allen, Honourable Barnes, Honourable Dugmore, Honourable Windvogel. I now put the motions duly submitted and approved by the Programming Authority to the House. Are there any objections?
No.
No objections? Agreed to. The motions will appear in the minutes of the proceedings and in Hansard in each individual member's names as if that member had read them aloud. I will now afford the opportunity to members to move motions without notice as per Standing Rule 152D. This could include motions without notice that were not approved of during the Programming Authority meeting. So members are reminded that the 30 minutes as per the Standing Rule will now start. And please, members, I'm very clear on the notices of that the motions that you will have submitted are the ones that you are going to read. I recognise the Honourable Windvogel.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move without notice that the House commends our national government for the responsible manner in which it managed the COVID-19 pandemic in South Africa that shows it cares about the poor and vulnerable, together with more privileged citizens alike. I thank you.
Thank you. Are there any objections to the motion being moved without notice?
Object.
There are objections. The motion will be printed on the order paper. I recognize Honourable Member Nkondlu. Honourable Nkondlu, are you there?
Lost the iPad. She can't find the iPad.
I will move over to Honourable Dugmore.
Send water to Swellendam, please, dear government.
Oh, Honourable Nkondlu? No. Honourable
Genoeg water in Swellendam.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move without notice that this House notes the outcomes at the Supreme Court of Appeal in the murder case of Ahmed Timol, who was killed by former apartheid policeman Joe Rodriguez, and calls for all those apartheid criminals who did not apply for amnesty, as well as those who were unsuccessful in their amnesty applications, to be charged and face prosecution by our courts.
Thank you. Are there any objections to the motion being moved without notice?
Object.
Objection.
The motion will
the ANC spies.
The order. The motion will be printed on the order paper. Order members, I now recognize Honourable Lecker.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move that the House commends the police for launching a big manhunt after gunmen killed the 7 people in Kukuletu last night. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any objections to the motion being moved without notice? No objections? Agreed to. I recognize Honourable Van Voorgel.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move without notice that the House notes the flare-ups areas for COVID pandemic third wave are reaching hectic proportion also in the Western Cape, like in Klipfontein and parts of Swellendam, and calls on the Provincial Health Department to keep the legislature abreast of the developments. I so move.
Thank you. Are there any objections to the motion being moved without notice? No objections? Agreed to. I recognize Honourable Dugmore.
Thank you.
I see that.
Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I move on behalf of the ANC that this House, without notice that is, notes that despite a provincial alcohol harms reduction policy having been gazetted in 2017, the Provincial Cabinet has still not published a bill to amend the Provincial Liquor Act. The DA has allowed the sale of alcohol at public schools and has allowed local municipalities in the province to extend trading hours to such an extent that we have longer trading hours than any other province, and expresses its deep concern at the apparent capture of certain DA leaders by the liquor industry and the resultant high levels of fetal alcohol syndrome, gender-based violence, murder and violence in our communities. I so move.
Thank you. Are there any objections to the motion being moved?
Objections.
Objections. The motion will be printed on the order paper. I recognize Honourable Van Voorgel.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. On behalf of the ANC, I move without notice that the House notes the global vaccine producers chose South Africa twice as an additional area to develop and produce jabs for the continental market. I so move.
Thank you. Are there any objections to the motion being moved without notice? No objections? Agreed to. I'm going to just come back. Honourable Nkondlu, are you there? I take it that she's not. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of motions without notice. That concludes the business for the day. The Secretary will now end the meeting and all members will be exited from the sitting. The House is adjourned.
Thank you.